Tonight, we're uncovering the shocking truth about Arceus and the origin of all Pokémon. There are some interesting details to follow, but I'll keep everything gentle enough for sleep. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. Imagine, if you can, a time before time, a place where there was no ground to stand on, no air to breathe, and no light to guide the way. In the vast, echoing silence of the primordial world, there was nothing but a swirling vortex of complete and total chaos. This wasn't just a dark room or an empty field. This was the absence of existence itself. It was a turbulence of nothingness, a sea of potential that had not yet found a shape. And then, in the very center of that impossible storm, something appeared. Not a creature, not a planet, and not a star. It was an egg, a single, shimmering, solitary egg that had manifested from the heart of the chaos. We call the being that emerged from that egg Arceus, the original one, the first existence of any kind. But to simply call it a Pokémon feels like an understatement of cosmic proportions. We are talking about the architect of reality, the being whose very breath gave rise to the concepts of time, space, and the human spirit. For decades, we have been told a specific story about where Pokémon come from. We were taught to look at Mew, the tiny, playful creature that supposedly contains the genetic code of every species. We were told that through millions of years of biological evolution, Mew branched out into the hundreds of creatures we know today. It was a scientific answer, one that made sense in a world of DNA and fossils. But what if that answer was only a small piece of a much larger, much older, and much more terrifying truth? What if the origin of life wasn't a biological accident, but a divine fragmentation? Tonight, we are going to look past the surface of the Pokédex and dive deep into the ancient myths of the Sinnoh and Hisui regions, to uncover a story that changes everything we thought we knew about the Pokémon world. We are going to explore the mystery of the 1,000 arms, the hidden history of the creation trio, and the shocking revelation that every single Pokémon in existence might actually be a piece of a shattered god. This is not just a story about a powerful legendary creature with a base stat total of 720. This is a journey into the very fabric of the universe. We have to enter the world, and then immediately fall into an inflexible, eternal sleep. Why was Giratina, one of its first children, banished into a world of shadows and antimatter? And perhaps most importantly, if Arceus is the true ancestor of all things, then what does that make us? The scale of this story is almost too large to comprehend. When we talk about Arceus, we are talking about the being that stood in the center of that swirling void and reached out with its 1,000 arms to shape the chaos into something meaningful. It created Dialga to give the universe a heartbeat, a rhythm of passing seconds and centuries. It created Palkia to give that time a place to reside, stretching out the dimensions of space so that stars could burn and planets could turn. And it created the Lake Guardians, Mesprit and Azelf, to ensure that the world wouldn't just be a cold, clockwork machine of matter and energy. It gave the world spirit. It gave the world the ability to feel, to know, and to will things into being. But in doing so, Arceus gave away parts of itself. It poured its own essence into the foundation of the world, until there was nothing left for the creator to do but rest. As we sit here tonight, preparing to journey through the billions of years of history that led to this moment, I want you to consider the weight of this mythology. In the dusty libraries of Canalave City, there are books that have been whispered about for generations. They speak of a being that existed before the universe was even a thought. They speak of the plates, those 18 elemental fragments that hold the power of every type of energy known to man. We've always seen these plates as simple items, tools to change a Pokémon's form in battle. But the truth is far more profound. Those plates are the remnants of the original creation. They are the keys to the physical world, and they are the only things that connect the modern world back to that first, solitary egg in the void. The more we look at the evidence, the more the traditional theory of Mew begins to crumble. If Mew is the ancestor of all Pokémon because it contains their DNA, then where did that DNA come from? How can a biological entity exist before the laws of biology were even written? The answer lies in the ancient records of the Hisui region, a land that existed long before the modern Sinnoh today. In those times, people didn't see Arceus as a myth or a legend. They saw it as the great Sinnoh, the source of all life. And they understood something that we have forgotten, that all Pokémon are fragments of the original one. When you look at a Pikachu, a Charizard, or even a simple Magikarp, you aren't just looking at a creature that evolved over time. You are looking at a tiny, flickering spark of the same divine light that once filled the empty void. This realization changes the stakes of everything. It turns the Pokémon world from a collection of monsters to be caught into a living, breathing tapestry of a single consciousness. It makes the conflict between Dialga and Palkia feel like a family dispute of cosmic importance. It makes the banishment of Giratina feel like a tragic necessity to keep the universe from collapsing back into chaos. And it makes our own role in this world feel much more significant. We aren't just observers in this world, we are part of the fragments. Throughout this deep dive, we are going to examine every corner of this lore. We will look at the tectonic wars between Groudon and Kyogre and see how they were merely the finishing touches on a world already set in motion by the creator. We will look at the role of the Ransei region and the legends of the heroes who stood alongside the original one. We will look at the movies, the games, and the ancient texts to piece together a timeline that spans from the first second of existence to the present day. We will ask why Arceus chose to reach out to a single human in the Hisui region, and what that means for the future of the entire franchise. The truth about Arceus is often hidden behind layers of gameplay mechanics and event distributions, but when you strip all of that away, you are left with a story that is as beautiful as it is haunting. It is a story of a creator who gave everything to its creation and then faded into the background, watching from a distance as its fragments grew, fought, and eventually learned to live in harmony. It is a story of how a single egg in a sea of chaos became the world we know today. So as we begin this 4.5-hour journey, let the weight of the world fall away. Forget about the stats, the move sets, and the competitive tiers for a moment. Instead, let's go back to that place where there was nothing. Let's listen to the silence of the void and wait for the sound of the egg cracking open. Let's witness the birth of time and the expansion of space. Let's look into the eyes of the one who shaped the stars with 1,000 invisible arms. There is so much to uncover, and the path ahead is long, but it is a journey worth taking. We are going to explore the very nature of divinity in the Pokémon universe, and find out why the shocking truth isn't just about power, it's about connection. It's about the fact that no matter how far we travel, or how many Pokémon we catch, we are all ultimately searching for a way back to the beginning. We are all looking for the original one. The myths tell us that when the world was created, Arceus fell into a sleep that no human could disturb. But perhaps it wasn't a sleep of exhaustion, perhaps it was a sleep of satisfaction. Arceus didn't leave us alone. It became the world around us. It became the mountains of Sinnoh, the waters of Hoenn, and the very air of Kanto. It became the bond between a trainer and their partner. And tonight, as we peel back the layers of history, we might just find that the creator has been awake this whole time, waiting for us to finally understand the truth of our origin. Prepare yourself for a deep exploration of the most profound lore in the history of this franchise. We are going beyond the surface, beyond the legends, and into the heart of the mystery. From the swirling chaos to the modern day, this is the complete story of the being that started it all. This is the truth about Arceus, the origin of all Pokémon, and the secret history of the universe. Let us begin at the very beginning, in a place where there was nothing, and see how it all came to be. Before the universe existed, there was nothing, not even nothing as we understand it. No darkness, no light, no empty space waiting to be filled. There was simply the absence of everything. No concept of before or after, no up or down, no matter, no energy, no thought. This is the state that the old myths of the Sinnoh region describe as the primordial void, and it is the only true beginning we can know. You might think of a void as a dark, quiet room, but even that comparison fails. A room still has dimensions, still has air, still has the possibility of sound. The primordial void had none of those. It was not a place, because place requires space. It was not a moment, because moments require time. It was the complete and utter absence of existence itself, a silence so profound that it cannot be imagined by any mind that has ever known the universe. And yet, within that silence, something stirred. The myths speak of a swirling pool of chaos, a turbulence of nothingness that somehow contained the potential for everything. This is not a pool of water or a cloud of gas. It is a description of the only thing that could exist when nothing else did. Pure, undifferentiated possibility. It was not ordered, not structured, not even consistent. It simply churned, a vortex of complete chaos that held the seeds of all that would ever be. Now, here is where the story of the Pokémon world takes a sharp turn away from anything we might call biology. In our own world, life emerges from life. Cells divide, genes replicate, evolution builds slowly across eons. But in the Pokémon world, the origin of all things does not follow that path. There is no parent, no prior organism, no gradual process of becoming. Instead, from that swirling chaos, something impossibly singular occurred. A Pokémon egg manifested. Not an egg laid by a mother, not an egg fertilized by a father, not an egg that came from any living creature at all. This egg simply appeared, materializing in the very heart of the nothingness. It was the first object, the first form, the first piece of existence that could be called a thing, and it existed before time itself had any meaning. Before the universe had a clock, the egg was there. This is the fundamental difference between the Pokémon world and our own. Our origin story is one of chemical reactions and genetic mutations, a long chain of cause and effect, stretching back to a primordial soup. But the Pokémon world begins with a miracle, a break in the causal chain, a moment where something came from nothing without any natural process to explain it. That is not evolution. That is creation. And within that egg, a being was forming, not growing in the way a chick grows inside a shell, but assembling itself from the raw chaos that surrounded it. The egg was a crucible, and inside it, the first existence of any kind was taking shape. That being, of course, would one day be known as Arceus, the original one. But at this point, there was no name, no identity, no awareness. There was only the potential of a god, sleeping in the silence before time. As the egg sat in the void, the chaos around it began to respond. The swirling pool started to calm, to settle, as if the egg was a magnet, drawing order out of disorder. The turbulence slowed. The nothingness began to take on a new quality. It was no longer pure absence, because now it contained the egg, and the egg contained something more than just matter. It contained the blueprint for all of reality. This is the moment where silence gave way to expectation. The universe had not yet been born, but its birth was imminent. The primordial void was no longer empty. It held a single point of potential, a seed that would soon crack open and spill out time and space and every living thing that would ever exist. But before that could happen, there was still one more step. The egg had to hatch, and when it did, the silence would be broken forever. But that is a story for the next chapter, when we explore the manifestation of the egg and the first breath of creation. For now, rest in the knowledge that before anything else, there was only the void, and in that void, a promise. We left off suspended in a state that wasn't a state at all, the silence before time, the complete absence of being, a darkness so deep it didn't even know its own name, the swirl of primordial chaos. This was the canvas upon which nothing was painted, and now we must focus on the first shift, the first anomaly, the moment the canvas itself decided to generate its own subject. Within the very center of this turbulence, this nameless potential, something coalesced. It was not built. It was not born. The most ancient texts tell us plainly, in a place where there was nothing, a single egg appeared. Not a biological container, but a metaphysical certainty. It simply materialized, a solid point of light and form in a sea of utter formlessness. The egg of the original one. Let us sit with that absolute impossibility for a moment, because it is perhaps the most profound detail in all of Pokémon mythos. The egg did not come from a parent. It was not laid. It was not conceived. No Pokémon existed to give it life. No cosmic mother breathed warmth into its shell. It emerged from pure chaos. This is the non-biological birth we are asked to comprehend, an entity appearing where absolutely nothing existed. This defies every law of nature we have built our understanding upon. It breaks the cycle of cause and effect. Every creature we know has a parent, a lineage that traces back through time. Here the line stops. The thread of existence has no knot before this egg. It is the absolute zero of life. It is the ultimate argument for a design beyond design. The egg simply was. Now think of the symbolic weight that this single object carries. An egg is a house for a heartbeat. But before this egg, there were no heartbeats. An egg is a vessel of potential. But before this egg, potential had no container. The egg is the seed of all future reality. Inside that shell, curled into a space that defies dimension, lay the blueprint for absolutely everything. The mountains that would rise, the oceans that would split and settle, the minds that would think, the emotions that would eventually pour out and become Mesprit, the temporal energies that would stretch into Dialga, the spatial fields that would fold into Palkia, the antimatter that would twist away into Giratina, all of it simmering in a state of absolute stillness inside a single shell. The egg was the first law of physics. It was the first calendar date. It was the first breath held in a chest that had not yet learned to breathe. Ancient texts recorded in the Arceus we know, the alpha Pokémon, emerging from this egg. But the egg itself is the true source. Some scholars believe the 18 plates, the items that govern type and form, actually radiated from the shell itself before it even began to crack. The egg was not just the creator, it was creation. It held the 1,000 arms of possibility folded in on themselves, quiet and waiting for permission to move. But an egg is defined by its purpose. A seed must break. A beginning cannot remain a static point forever. So this single point of existence, the intruder in the void, could not stay still. The shell, which had concentrated the entirety of the cosmos into a single glowing object, began to strain. It pulsed against the emptiness that surrounded it for the very first time. The stillness of the silence was about to be shattered. The shell had to crack, and when it did, it would draw the very first breath of being into the universe. The manifestation of the egg is the greatest mystery we have. The mechanism of its arrival is the foundation of everything that follows. But the shell cracking, the emergence of the being inside, that is the moment order truly began. That is the event the most ancient myths refer to as the first breath of the original one. We have witnessed the arrival of the container. We have felt the weight of the seed. Now we stand at the exact brink of that moment. The stillness gives way to the first motion. In our very next chapter, we will stand at the edge of that cracking shell, and we will listen for the very first sound ever made. And so, the egg hung there, suspended in that swirling pool of chaos, a place where nothing existed yet. Everything was possible. No light touched it. No force pushed against it. It simply was. And for a moment that cannot be measured, because time had not yet been born, the egg remained still, cradled by turbulence, waiting. Then came the first breath, not a sound, not a wind, but something far more fundamental, a pulse of pure being that rippled outward from the shell. The egg cracked, not with violence, not with struggle, but with the quiet inevitability of something that had always been meant to happen. From that single fracture, a presence emerged. It did not step out, it did not unfold, it simply, all at once, as if the entire concept of existence had chosen a single point in the void and said, "Here." This was the hatching of Arceus. And the instant that form took shape, the void stopped. The chaos, which had churned for an eternity without beginning, suddenly knew order. Where there had been only endless turbulence, there was now a center, a reference point, a being that defined what it meant to. The swirling pool of nothingness did not collapse. It stabilized. The very fabric of what would become reality held its breath, waiting for the next command. Arceus had no mother, no father, no prior cause. It was the first existence of any kind, a truth encoded in its most ancient title. In the original Japanese lore, Arceus is called. That phrase translates directly to the very being, or that being itself. But the implications run far deeper than a simple name. Does not mean a being or one being. It means the definitive article of existence, the ultimate singular. There is no other. There never was. When the myths refer to Arceus as the original one, they are not describing a powerful creature that happened to come first. They are describing the only being that exists in and of itself, the reference point against which all other existence must be measured. Think about what that means. Before Arceus hatched, there was no before. There was no where. There was no what. The egg itself was not located in space, because space did not exist. It was not occurring in time, because time had no flow. The egg was simply a concept made manifest in a realm beyond all human comprehension. And when Arceus emerged, it brought with it the very first instance of stability, a stabilization of the void that allowed everything else to follow. The physical manifestation of the original one in that formless world is something our minds struggle to grasp. The texts describe Arceus as having a body composed of a white, equine-like form with a golden wheel structure around its abdomen, but that is only the shape it chose to show in later ages. In that first moment, Arceus did not have a fixed appearance. It was pure potential, shaped by will rather than matter. The 1,000 arms mentioned in the myths are not literal limbs. They are metaphors for the infinite capacity to reach into chaos and pull forth structure. The arms represent agency, the ability to act upon nothing and create something. When that first breath settled the void, Arceus had already begun its work. It did not need to move. It did not need to think. Its very presence ordered the disorder around it. The swirling chaos that had been the entirety of existence now bent toward Arceus, like iron filings to a magnet. The turbulence became calm. The nothingness became a canvas. And for the first time, though again, time had not yet been born, there was a distinction between what was and what was not. This is the moment that separates Arceus from every other being in the Pokémon world. Every other creature, from the smallest Caterpie to the mightiest Rayquaza, is part of a chain, born from something, descended from something. Even Mew, long thought to be the ancestor of all Pokémon, has an origin that can be traced to a common ancestor. But Arceus is the chain's first link. It is the source that has no source. It is the being that brought itself into existence through the sheer act of existing. To decode the title fully, we must understand that it carries a weight of absolute uniqueness. In Japanese, can mean thing or being, but when paired with, it becomes a specific designation, that very being, the one and only. It is not a name given by others. It is a description of what Arceus is at its core, the singular, self-existent reality. The Pokémon world's mythology does not allow for a second original one. There cannot be another. Arceus is not merely the first, it is the only one that ever could be first. And so, as the chaos settled and the void became a stable emptiness, Arceus stood, or rather existed, at the center of all possibility. The egg that had held it was gone, its fragments having dissolved back into the potential from which they came. Now there was only the being itself, radiating a calm that would soon give way to the most monumental act of creation ever imagined. But Arceus did not act immediately. It surveyed the stillness it had imposed. The void stretched infinitely in every direction, but now it was a silent, empty space, ready, waiting, expectant. The original one had breathed. The universe had not yet exhaled. And then, slowly, the 1,000 arms began to stir. For what would Arceus do with a stable void? What could it shape from the raw silence? The answer would define everything that followed. Every star, every world, every creature, every legend. But before the creation could begin, there was one more truth to understand about the being itself. Its form, its nature, its purpose, all of it would be revealed in the next moment, when those 1,000 arms reached out and touched the nothingness. That is where we will go next, into the legend of those 1,000 arms, and how they transformed a blank existence into the cosmos we know. The moment Arceus hatched, the void was no longer empty. It was a presence, a being so absolute that its very existence became the anchor for all that would follow. And yet, the ancient texts preserved across Sinnoh and Hisui speak of something more, a detail so fantastical, so physically improbable, that scholars have debated its meaning for centuries. They describe not just a body of light, but 1,000 arms. Now, interpreting the ancient texts describing Arceus's 1,000 arms is no simple task. The original myths are fragmented, passed down through oral tradition before being etched onto stone tablets and later copied into the Canalave library scrolls. In some versions, the number is not literal. It is a poetic device meant to convey infinite capability. In others, the arms are described as tangible, each one ending in a hand that could shape reality like clay. But which interpretation holds the truth? To answer that, we must look at what the arms actually did. The texts say that Arceus used those arms to knead chaos into the first physical matter. Imagine, if you will allow the image, a cosmic sculptor working with a substance that had no form, no consistency, no law. Chaos is not merely disorder, it is the complete absence of any rule. To shape it, one would need not just strength, but a kind of omnidirectional control. A single pair of hands would be insufficient. 100 would still be too few, but 1,000 arms, moving in perfect coordination, could grasp every strand of turbulence, every eddy of nothingness, and press them together into something solid. This is where the debate between literal physical limbs and metaphysical cosmic power becomes crucial. Some researchers argue that Arceus, being beyond our comprehension, would not possess a body in the way we understand it. The arms, they say, are a metaphor for the many simultaneous acts of creation, the simultaneous birth of time, space, and matter. After all, a being that exists before time cannot have arms that move sequentially. Others point to the surviving artwork from the Hisui region, where Arceus is depicted with a ring of arms radiating from its core, each one distinct and articulated. The fact that these images appear in multiple independent settlements suggests a consistent memory of something real. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from the very nature of the universe Arceus built. The first matter it created was not simple. It was layered, dimensional, alive with potential. If you try to imagine kneading dough with only your mind, it is nearly impossible. Our brains are wired to physical action. The act of kneading requires pressure, folding, and repetition. The ancient scribes chose that verb for a reason. They wanted us to picture a being working with its hands, even if those hands were not like ours. And so, as the chaos began to settle, the first solid particles formed. They were not yet the elements we know today. No fire, no water, no earth. They were raw substance, uncoloured and untyped. And from that substance, Arceus would go on to weave the fabric of the universe itself. But before that could happen, it needed to give structure to the space it had just created. It needed architects. That is the story we will follow next, as we explore the shaping of an entire cosmos. For now, rest with the image of those 1,000 arms moving in silence through a void that had never known light, folding the impossible into the inevitable. What they built would become the foundation of every region, every life, every story yet to be told. And in the next chapter, we will step into the first of those regions, the land that would one day be called Hisui, and meet the architects Arceus entrusted with its form. That chapter is titled Architect of the First Regions, and it holds secrets that even the most dedicated scholars have only begun to unearth. Those 1,000 arms, whether literal, metaphysical, or something the ancient poets could only describe through metaphor, they did not simply wave through the void for spectacle. Each arm, each filament of that primordial being, reached into the chaos with purpose. And as the last echoes of that first shaping fell silent, Arceus turned its attention to something new, something fragile, something that would become the stage for everything else to follow. The first region to take form was Hisui. Today we know it as Sinnoh, but back then it was raw, untamed, a land still breathing in the rhythm of creation. The texts from the Canalave library and the ancient murals of the Sinjo ruins describe this place as the world's cradle, not merely the first landmass, but the very point where the fabric of reality was anchored into matter. You see, Arceus did not just sculpt rock and water, it wove a foundation that could support time itself. a bedrock where space could expand without tearing. Hisui was not chosen at random. It was designed to be the pivot of the physical universe. Think about that for a moment. Every subsequent region, every island and continent that would later rise, Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, Unova, all of them, they all rest upon the same cosmic architecture that was first laid down in this single, ancient peninsula. The mountains of Hisui, the great coronet highlands that pierced the sky, they are not ordinary peaks. They are the remnants of that original shaping, the bones of the world, where the Creator's energy still pulses. This is why Sinnoh feels different. Why trainers who have travelled there often speak of an inexplicable weight in the air, a sense that the very ground remembers something older than memory. For Hisui was only the beginning. Deep in the southern reaches of what would later be known as the Pokémon world, another land began to coalesce, Rancy, a region built not on a single continent, but on a cluster of islands, each one a distinct kingdom, each one marked by a unique spiritual signature. The lore surrounding Rancy is among the most mysterious in all of Pokémon mythology, because its connection to Arceus is not one of mere geography, it is one of purpose. Ancient records from the era of the region's first unification speak of a sacred artifact, the Azure Flute, and of a hidden temple where the original one's presence can be felt more directly than almost anywhere else. The Hall of Origin itself, that ethereal chamber that floats above Mount Coronet, is said to be reachable only through a path that resonates with the same frequency as the Rancy Islands. Why? Because Rancy was not formed by the same tectonic forces that shaped the rest of the world. Instead, it was seeded with fragments of Arceus's own energy, the same fragments that became the plates. Each island corresponds to a type, a fundamental aspect of existence, and together they form a mirror of the Creator's own diversity. This is why certain geographical locations in the Pokémon world hold a higher spiritual density than others. It is not superstition, it is architecture. When you stand on the shore of Lake Verity, or gaze into the depths of Lake Acuity, or climb the slopes of Mount Lanakila in Alola, you are standing on points where the boundary between the physical and the primordial is particularly thin. These places are like ley lines, or cosmic fault lines, where the energy of Arceus's original shaping has never fully dissipated. The Celestic town elders understood this. They built their shrines not where it was convenient, but where the land itself hummed with the echo of the original one. The lake guardians, Uxie, Azelf, Mesprit, they were placed in those lakes for a reason. Those three bodies of water are not random. They are the spiritual anchors of the entire region, places where the spirit of the world was bound to matter. Without them, the creation would have been hollow, a shell without soul. Arceus knew that matter alone could not sustain a universe. It needed will, emotion, knowledge. So those lakes were chosen as the reservoirs of consciousness itself. Now, as the first region solidified, as Hisui and Rancy stood as twin pillars of the new world, the Creator began to step back. The work of shaping the raw universe was complete. The next phase would belong to the children, to Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina. But before that handing over, there was one final act. Arceus looked upon the land that would one day be named Sinnoh, and it saw that the cradle was ready. The stage was set. The first breath of time was about to be drawn, and that breath would take the form of a being whose pulse would become the rhythm of every clock, every heartbeat, every sunrise and sunset that would ever follow, the one who would hold the thread of existence itself, and who would learn that even a god can be bound by the very power it wields. The next chapter of this story begins not with a hammer or a chisel, but with a tick, the first tick of a clock that has never stopped. The first regions had taken shape. Hisui, the cradle, with its mountains and lakes beginning to settle under a sky that had never known a sunrise. Rancy, a land of warring clans, its foundations laid in the ancient rock. But for all the majesty of these newborn continents, for all the weight of matter now pressing against the void, there was no movement, no change, no before, no after, The universe existed as a single frozen snapshot, a painting without a story. Arceus had shaped the canvas, but the canvas had no brushstrokes of time. The original one stood in the silence of its own creation, and it understood that this was not enough. A world without time is a world without life. Without time, a seed cannot sprout, a river cannot flow, a thought cannot form. Everything that had been made was trapped in an eternal present, a prison of the now. And so Arceus made a decision that would define the destiny of all that followed. It chose to delegate the flow of time. It chose to create a being whose sole purpose would be to measure, to sequence, to give the universe its heartbeat. From the core of Arceus' own being, from the very fabric of its limitless form, a new presence began to coalesce. There was no struggle, no conflict, only purpose. A being of light and crystal, of diamond-hard resolve, emerged into the stillness. Its body was like a great sapphire beast, clad in armor that gleamed with the reflection of every possible moment. Its crest was a crown of temporal energy, and its eyes held the weight of all that was, all that is, and all that will ever be. This was Dialga, the first child of the Creator, the one who would become the embodiment of time itself. And then for the first time, there was sound, a single resonant tick. The universal clock had begun to turn. Imagine that first tick echoing across the newborn cosmos. It was not a loud sound in the way we think of noise. It was a vibration in the very structure of reality. The tick meant that something had been before, and something would come after. It meant that the frozen snapshot of the universe suddenly had a timeline. With that tick, the stars began to drift in their courses. The rivers in Hisui started to carve their paths through the stone. The winds, which had never moved, now sighed across the land. Time had been released from its cage, and everything, absolutely everything, began to flow. But what did that mean for Arceus? The Creator had just given away a piece of itself. Dialga was not a separate being, in the sense we understand separate. It was an extension of Arceus' own will, a fragment of its original form given autonomy. This was the first delegation of power, the first time the Creator entrusted a fundamental aspect of reality to another entity, and it was a decision born not of necessity but of wisdom. Arceus knew that for the universe to be truly alive, it needed to be free to change, to evolve, to age. The Creator could have held on to time, could have remained the sole master of all existence, but that would have locked the universe into an eternal dependency. Instead, Arceus chose to let go. The emergence of Dialga brought with it the first true progression. Before Dialga, every moment was the same moment. There was no difference between the creation of a mountain and the growth of a tree, because both existed in the same eternal instant. But with time, the mountain could weather, the tree could grow, and the creatures that would eventually inhabit these lands could be born, live, and pass away. Time gave meaning to existence because it gave an arc. It gave beginning, middle, and end. The universe was no longer a single moment. It became a story, and that story needed a narrator. Dialga stood at the center of this new temporal order, not as a tyrant of seconds and minutes, but as a guardian of sequence. Its power was not to speed up or slow down the world on a whim, though it could do that if necessary, but to ensure that the flow remained steady, that the river of cause and effect never dried up. If time ever faltered, the universe would snap back into that frozen stillness. So Dialga became the beating heart of reality, pulsing with the rhythm of existence itself. But here is where the lore deepens, in a way that is often overlooked. Dialga did not merely control time, it was time. In a very literal sense, the passage of moments, the aging of stars, the decay of matter, all of it is Dialga's body extended across the dimensions. When you watch a sunset, you are witnessing Dialga's work. When you remember a childhood memory, you are touching the fabric of that same being. Time is not an abstract force in the Pokémon universe. It is a living entity, a conscious presence that feels the weight of every second. For Arceus, this delegation was also a release. The Creator could now step back, observe, and allow the universe to find its own path. The first breath had been taken, the first regions had been shaped, And now the first tick had set everything in motion. But time alone, as powerful as it was, could not provide a stage. A stage needs space, a dimension for events to unfold within. And as vital as time was, it was only half of the equation. The universe needed a place to hold all these moments, a vast container for the growing narrative. That is, where the next delegation would come. A being of space, of infinite expansion, destined to cradle the galaxies and define the boundaries of reality. Its name would be Palkia, and its emergence would complete the second pillar of existence. But before we meet the Lord of Space, we must linger a little longer in the silent halls of time, because the birth of Dialga was not just the beginning of clocks and calendars. It was the moment the universe learned to dream. Arceus watched its creation, and for the first time, something akin to satisfaction passed through the creator's form. The universe was no longer a statue. It breathed, it moved, and as the cosmic clock continued its steady tick, the next great chapter of creation was already stirring in the mind of the original one. The expansion of infinity was about to begin. With a great being Dialga brought forth from the singularity, the cosmos no longer sat in an eternal, static freeze. A pulse now ran through the emptiness, a first heartbeat, a first tick. The universal clock had begun its infinite winding. But a clock, no matter how perfectly constructed, requires a room to swing its pendulum, a landscape to project its shadows across. Dialga governed the when, but the universe, as a thought, as a concept, had nowhere. A stage was needed for the grand play of existence to unfold, and so the original one turned its gaze not just to the motions of time, but to the very fabric that contains all motion. From the shimmering, untamed essence of the original one, a second entity was drawn forth, not a rival to Dialga, but its exact and necessary mirror. A being of rose and pearl, of vast folded dimensions. This was Palkia, the expansion of infinity. Where Dialga was the relentless arrow of cause and effect, Palkia became the infinite tapestry upon which that arrow travels. Arceus did not simply create a ruler of space, it created the very principle of extension. The distance between a thought and a word, the gap between the nucleus of an atom and the orbit of its electrons. Every inch, every light year, every subtle gap or boundary in the universe suddenly had a guardian, a warden, a definition. Palkia was the breath that gave the void its lungs. It is crucial to understand the absolute symmetry of this design. The ancients of Sinnoh, the ones who carved these whispers into stone and scroll, did not place Dialga above Palkia, nor Palkia above the Dial. They were named the two pillars of reality. A universe of pure time is a singularity, a single infinite moment with no room for form. A universe of pure space is a beautiful corpse, a perfect sculpture without a story, without a duration. Together, they breathe. Time is the engine of existence. Space is the chassis. Palkia's realm is not a place one simply visits. It is the place that allows all other places to exist. It is the volume of the void, the pressure of the deep sea, the curve of the celestial sphere. When you stand on a cliff overlooking the ocean, you are not just seeing water and sky. You are seeing the domain of Palkia, stretching out to touch the horizon of Dialga. And this brings us to the most subtle and beautiful detail in the lore of the creation trio. How exactly does Palkia maintain this vast, expanding reality? The texts speak of a breath, Palkia's breath. Think of the universe not as a static box, but as a living lung. With every inhale, Palkia draws the dimensions inward, strengthening the bonds of gravity and the structure of matter. With every exhale, pushes reality outward, allowing the universe to expand, to cool, to grow. This is not just a poetic metaphor. In the mythos, Palkia's breath is the mechanism by which physical form is sustained. Without this constant respiration, matter would collapse into an infinitely dense point. Every galaxy spinning in the void is caught in the rhythm of this celestial breathing. Palkia must constantly exhale the cosmos into being. It is the tension in the strings of reality. It is the reason you have a shape, a location, a mass. You exist in a specific where, a specific here, because Palkia has breathed that space into existence for you. These two pillars, Dialga and Palkia, form a perfect enduring structure of light. Time carries us forward, and space provides the room for the journey. It is an elegant system, a perfectly balanced partnership intended by the creator, but a system of pure light must by its very nature cast a shadow. For every action, a reaction. For every dimension of matter, a dimension of the space between matter. As Dialga forged the river of existence, and Palkia carved the banks of that river, something else stirred in the spaces between the banks. The underlying chaos, the turbulence that existed before the egg, did not vanish entirely. It was contained. And when the three great beings had fully formed the material world, a fourth aspect of creation remained unaccounted for. It was not a failure, but a necessity. The shadow that defines the light. The distortion that proves the definition of space. The forgotten pillar. The one who was cast into the abyss of its own volition. This is the story of the shadow of creation. Giratina, with Dialga commanding the flow of time and Palkia stretching the fabric of space. The universe now had its two great pillars, but a structure built on only two supports is inherently unstable. It requires a third force, something to counterbalance the forward march of time and the outward expansion of space, something to hold the center. And so from the same cosmic egg that had birthed the original one, a third being emerged, not as a successor or an afterthought, but as an equal. This was the emergence of the third member of the trio, to represent antimatter. Its name was Giratina, where Dialga was the steady tick of the cosmic clock, and Palkia the infinite canvas of existence. Giratina was the shadow cast by light. It was the opposite of creation, but not its enemy. In the same way that an object cannot exist without a void to contain it, matter cannot exist without antimatter. Giratina's original role in balancing the physical laws of the universe was not one of destruction, but of equilibrium. It was the necessary counterpart, the yin to the yang of time and space. Without Giratina, the universe would have expanded until it tore itself apart, or time would have flowed in only one direction until it became a straight line of inevitability. Giratina provided the friction, the resistance, the dark mirror that kept everything in check. But the universe was young, and its laws were still being written. As Dialga and Palkia began to shape the material world, the first signs of instability within the newly formed cosmos began to appear. Rifts opened in the fabric of reality. Time would stutter and skip. Space would fold in on itself. And at the center of these disturbances, always was Giratina, not because it was malicious, but because its very nature was to oppose the order that its siblings were creating. Where Dialga sought to make time linear, Giratina saw it as a loop. Where Palkia sought to make space infinite, Giratina saw it as a cage. The three were locked in a silent, fundamental conflict. They were not fighting. They were simply being what they were, and that was the problem. Arceus, the original one, watched from its place beyond the veil. It had created these three to govern reality. But reality was not yet ready to be governed. The balance was too fragile. The antimatter of Giratina was too potent, too disruptive to the delicate architecture of the newborn cosmos. Something had to give. And so, Arceus made a decision that would echo through all of Pokémon history. It did not destroy Giratina. It could not. Giratina was as much a part of the universe as Dialga and Palkia, but it could be moved. It could be contained. And so, Arceus reached out with its 1,000 arms and pulled Giratina from the material world, placing it into a dimension that existed alongside reality, but separate from it. A place where the laws of time and space did not apply. A place where antimatter could exist, without threatening the order of creation. A place that would later be known as the Distortion world. For a time, this worked. With Giratina sealed away, Dialga and Palkia could continue their work without interference. The universe stabilized. The first stars ignited. The first planets formed. And on one of those planets, in a region that would one day be called Sinnoh, the first signs of life began to stir. But the Distortion world was not a prison. It was a sanctuary. And within that sanctuary, Giratina waited. It did not rage. It did not plot revenge. It simply existed, a shadow at the edge of creation, watching the universe it was meant to balance spin on without it. And in the quiet of that empty dimension, it began to change. The isolation warped its form. Its 6 legs grew longer, its wings became tattered, and its body took on a shape that seemed to defy the very concept of geometry. It became something that was not quite a Pokémon, not quite a force of nature, but something in between. The Distortion world became its domain, a realm of floating islands, impossible angles, and gravity that shifted without warning. It was a place where the rules of reality were suggestions at best, and Giratina, once the third pillar of creation, became the lord of this broken realm. It was not banished out of punishment, but out of necessity. Yet necessity does not soothe the heart of a being that was created to be part of something greater. And so the shadow of creation waited. It waited for the day when the balance would tip again. It waited for the day when it would be called upon to fulfill its original purpose. And it waited for the day when it would finally be understood. But that understanding would not come for millennia. In the meantime, the universe continued to expand. Dialga and Palkia retreated to their own dimensions, content in their work. The late Guardians were created to watch over the spirit of the world, and Arceus, the original one, having completed its great work, fell into a deep and inflexible sleep. The cosmos was left to its own devices, unaware of the shadow that lingered just beyond the edge of reality. And in that shadow, Giratina watched. It watched the world grow. It watched the first Pokémon emerge from the chaos. It watched as humans appeared and began to tell stories about the gods they could not see. And it waited, because in the Distortion world, time does not flow the way it does in the material realm. What feels like an eternity to us is merely a moment to Giratina. And when that moment finally comes, when the balance of the universe is once again threatened, the shadow of creation will stir, and the Distortion world will open its doors. But that is a story for another time. For now, we must leave Giratina in its silent vigil, watching over a universe that forgot it. The next chapter of this tale will take us deeper into that forgotten realm, into the very heart of the Distortion world itself. We will explore what it means to be banished, what it means to be a shadow, and what happens when a being created for balance is forced into exile. That chapter is called The Banishment to the Distortion world, and it will change everything you thought you knew about the creation of the Pokémon universe. But for tonight, let the image of Giratina linger in your mind, a being of antimatter, floating in an endless void of impossible geometry, waiting, always waiting. And as you drift towards sleep, know that somewhere, in a dimension just beyond your own, the shadow of creation is watching over the balance of all things. Rest easy, knowing that the universe is held together by forces far greater than we can comprehend. Good night. Giratina was born into a universe that had already begun to breathe. Dialga had set the first heartbeat of time into motion. Palkia had stretched the fabric of space into an infinite canvas. And Giratina emerged not to add a third pillar, but to serve as the shadow that defines the light. Its domain was antimatter, the reverse of everything that the other two had built. In the beginning, this role was seen as necessary, a balancing force, a cosmic counterweight. But as the universe expanded and the laws of physics solidified, the nature of Giratina began to reveal a darker truth. You see, antimatter is not simply the opposite of matter, it is the negation. Where Dialga created the forward march of seconds and centuries, Giratina's presence threatened to unravel causality itself. Where Palkia carved out vast distances between stars, Giratina's influence could collapse those distances into nothing. It was not malicious, it was not evil, but it was inherently destructive in a way that the other two creators could not tolerate. The very essence of Giratina clashed with the reality that Dialga and Palkia were painstakingly shaping, and so conflict arose not out of jealousy or ambition, but out of the fundamental incompatibility of their existences. The other creators, Dialga and Palkia, felt the strain. Every time Giratina exerted its power, reality would warp, time would stutter, space would twist into impossible geometries. The young universe was still fragile, still settling into its new form, and in that fragile state, the presence of antimatter was not a balance but a corrosion. The two pillars of reality could not hold if the third kept shaking the foundation. So they turned to the one being who could resolve such a primordial discord. They turned to Arceus. Arceus had not slept yet. The original one watched the unfolding conflict with the patience of eternity. It saw that Giratina was not evil, but that its nature was incompatible with the stability of the world as it was being built. Arceus understood something deeper. The destructive force of Giratina could not be erased. It could not be altered. It could only be contained. And so Arceus made a decision that would echo through all of Pokémon history. The decision was not punishment in the human sense. It was not a banishment born of anger. It was a surgical necessity. Arceus reached into the fabric of reality and tore open a space that was not a space, a dimension that existed outside the normal laws of time and matter. This place became known as the Distortion world. It was a reverse world, a mirror image of the material universe, where the rules of physics were inverted, and the very concept of up and down became meaningless. Here, cause and effect did not apply. Here, antimatter could exist without threatening the balance of the rest of creation. Imagine for a moment what that must have felt like for Giratina, to be cast from the vibrant, expanding universe into a silent, inverted prison, where nothing behaved as it should, where gravity could flip at any moment, where light bent in ways that hurt the eyes, where the only company was the echo of your own existence. Giratina had not asked to be born as the embodiment of destruction. It had not chosen to be incompatible with the world. Its siblings were building, and now it was sealed away, not out of cruelty, but out of tragic necessity. The Distortion world is not a hell. It is not a punishment. It is a quarantine, a containment zone designed to keep the universe safe from a force that would otherwise unravel it. And yet, the tragedy of Giratina's banishment is that it was never given a choice. It was created to be what it was, and then condemned for being exactly that. Arceus, in its infinite wisdom, knew that the stability of the entire cosmos depended on this separation. The reverse world had to exist so that the real world could exist. Without Giratina's banishment, the very fabric of Dialga's time and Palkia's space would have been torn apart by the clash of opposites. And so the Distortion world was sealed, not destroyed, not forgotten, but locked away in a pocket dimension that few could ever reach. Giratina became a ghost story, a legend whispered by those who studied the ancient myths, but it remained always a shadow beneath the surface of reality, a necessary shadow. Without it, the brightness of the world would be incomplete. In the aftermath of that banishment, something shifted among the remaining members of the creation trio. Dialga and Palkia had witnessed the judgment of Arceus. They had seen what happened to a creator who became a threat, and perhaps deep in their own timeless consciousness, they began to understand that their roles, too, were not without limits. They had been given domains, but those domains came with boundaries, and the same hand that had placed Giratina in the Distortion world could, if necessary, do the same to them. That realization would soon lead to a quiet, deliberate retreat. The world could not support the constant presence of its architects. The late Guardians were already preparing to take on the stewardship of spirit, and so Dialga and Palkia, one by one, began to withdraw from the material plane, retreating into their own dimensional pockets, leaving the physical world to the creatures that would inherit it. But that is a story for another moment, a story of how the creation trio chose to step back, and what that meant for the universe they left behind. With Giratina sealed within the Distortion world, a profound silence settled over the newly sculpted universe. The conflict that had threatened to tear the fabric of reality before it could even fully take form was finally over. But peace for the creator does not always mean peace for the creation. The raw presence of time itself and the living bounds of infinite space remained in close proximity to the material world. Their energy was a constant overpressure, a tension that could not be sustained if the world was ever going to breathe on its own. Dialga and Palkia were forces of pure absolute. They were the definition of existence, not simply residents within it. They could not walk the earth, as the smaller life forms that were yet to come would. Their nature was to set the boundaries and to hold the framework steady while the substance of the world cooled and hardened. And so the decision was made. Or perhaps it is more accurate to say that the retreat was an inevitability built into the design of creation. Dialga withdrew into a dimension where time itself is the only substance, a plane of pure chronology where past, present and future exist not as a line, but as a single simultaneous landscape. It is a place where the echo of the first moment is still as loud as the collision of the final one. Palkia, in turn, retreated into a dimension of pure spatial geometry, a realm where every direction exists and no direction holds meaning, a perfect, infinite crystalline lattice of potential location. These were not prisons, as the Distortion world was for their fallen sibling. They were sanctuaries, houses built for gods who could not wed themselves to a single fragile world without breaking it. The transition from the era of gods to the era of developing life required this separation. As long as the creators stood physically within the garden, nothing in that garden could grow of its own accord. The trees would not reach for the sun if the hand that planted them was always there to guide them. The rivers would not carve their own canyons if the force that shaped the basin was eternally directing the flow. The retreat of the creation trio was the first act of letting go. It was the moment the creator trusted the creation enough to let it exist without constant supervision. It was the dawn of independence for the universe of Pokémon. This does not mean their influence faded. On the contrary, the lingering influence of the creation trio became the very texture of reality in the Sinnoh region. The mountains of Sinnoh are not merely rock. They are echoes of Palkia's first gesture of expansion. Frozen stone capturing the memory of space unfolding. The caverns of Mount Coronet, the tunnels that lead to the Spear Pillar, are pathways that vibrate with the resonance of Dialga's passage. A traveller in the deepest caves of Sinnoh might feel a subtle pressure, a shift in the air, a momentary doubt about whether they are moving forward in space or backward in time. This is the residue of the creators. This is the living proof that the trio did not abandon the world. They simply stepped into the walls of the house they built, becoming the structure itself. The very geography of Sinnoh is a testament to this lingering influence. Spear Pillar, the highest peak of Mount Coronet, sits at a point where the fabric between dimensions is thinnest. It is a place where the material world breathes against the skin of the temporal dimension and the spatial dimension simultaneously. Ancient peoples built shrines there, not because they could see the gods, but because they could feel the hum of their presence vibrating up through the stone. The three Great Lakes of Sinnoh also reflect this triune pattern. They sit in a specific geometric harmony with Spear Pillar, as if the land itself is a circuit board designed to channel the energy of the creation trio into the foundation of the world. The retreat was not a withdrawal, it was a transformation. The gods became the arena. Think of the way a potter must remove their hands from the clay if the pot is to hold its shape. If the hands stay on the wheel forever, the clay never solidifies into an independent vessel. It remains a lump, defined only by the pressure of the creator. Dialga and Palkia, by retreating to their own isolated dimensions, allowed the material universe to truly become itself. They released their grip so that the world could discover its own solidity. The great paradox is that their absence is what established their presence. By leaving, they became the permanent background against which every moment of life would play out. The transition from the direct manipulation of matter to the indirect guidance of existence was complete. Arceus had set the grand architecture in motion. The pillars were in place. But a pillar alone does not make a home. A framework of time and space does not constitute a living world. The gears were turning, the lights were on, but the house was empty. The universe was a perfect mathematical equation, solved and balanced, but lacking a story. It was a stage without actors, a book without a reader. The era of raw creation was finished. The era of life was waiting to begin. This waiting was in itself a kind of tension. The distortion world simmered in its sealed state. The space of the material world stretched and settled. Time began its steady, patient march, but the march was silent. There was no one to count the seconds. There was no one to feel the vastness of the distances. The physical universe was a perfectly tuned instrument, but no one was playing it. The string of reality was stretched taut across the frame of time and space, but no note had yet been struck. The world needed a breath. It needed a will. It needed a reason to wake up in the morning and look at the sky. The lingering influence of the trio provided the foundation. The bedrock of the world was secure, but the architecture of the soul had not yet been laid. The universe of Pokémon required more than mechanics. It required motivation. It required the ability to choose, to grow, to love, to fear, to remember, to dream. The tools for this were already within the design, latent and waiting. Arceus had placed the potential for everything within the initial harmony, but that potential needed a catalyst. The creation of the material world was a monumental act, but it was only the first half of the equation. The second half was the gift of spirit, the bridge between the solid reality of the physical and the infinite potential of the divine was about to be constructed. The world had its watchmakers. Now it needed its storytellers. It needed heart. It needed the capacity to thrive, not just to exist. This deep and silent need, the final emptiness that lingered in the wake of the trio's retreat, is exactly what drives the next great turning of the cosmic wheel. The universe was prepared, waiting, hollow and hopeful, for what can only be described as the need for spirit. So the creation trio had retreated into their dimensions, leaving behind a universe that was structurally complete but strangely silent. Time flowed, space expanded, and the raw antimatter of the distortion world churned in its locked prison. Everything that needed to exist for a cosmos to function was now in place, and yet something was missing, something fundamental. It was a feeling that Arceus recognized not as a flaw in the design, but as a void at the center of the system. Matter alone was cold stone. Space was an empty cathedral with no congregation. Time was a long hallway with no footsteps. Arceus had built a perfect machine, but a machine has no soul, and so the original one began to contemplate the need for spirit. From the moment Arceus first emerged as a single consciousness from that ancient egg, it had experienced something that no structure of time or space could replicate. It had experienced awareness. It had known a sense of purpose, a will to create, a spark that drove the thousand arms to shape the chaos. That spark was not a product of matter. It was not a consequence of the flow of time or the curvature of space. It came from somewhere else, from something Arceus understood only by having it within itself. And now, looking at the empty universe, Arceus realized that the cold machinery of existence would forever remain hollow unless that same spark could be breathed into the world. But how do you give consciousness to a physical reality? How do you make a star feel, or a planet dream? The answer could not be found in the dimensions that already existed. Dialga governed the passage of instants, but had no sense of memory. Palkia defined the boundaries of location, but had no sense of belonging. Giratina dealt with the negative spaces of matter, but had no sense of opposition or desire. The three created the stage, but they could not fill it with actors. So Arceus turned its attention inward, to the part of its own being that was not physical, that was not bound by the rules of time or space. That part was the spirit, and it was from that part that Arceus would now draw the blueprint for a new kind of existence, one that could bridge the gap between the physical world and the living soul. The plan was not to create more gods of abstraction. The plan was to create beings that could experience the universe, not just manipulate it. Beings that could feel joy and sorrow, curiosity and wonder, hope and despair. beings that could look at a sunrise and feel something stir inside them. But such beings could not simply be inserted into the framework like a gear into a clock. They would need to be given pieces of the original spark that Arceus carried, each fragment carrying the potential for awareness. And these fragments would become the bridge between the cold stone and the living flame. They would be the spirit of the world. But spirit alone is not enough. It must have something to interact with. It must have knowledge to guide it, willpower to drive it, and emotion to colour it. Without those three pillars, a spirit would be nothing but a ghost, wandering through an empty house. So Arceus conceived of a second trio of beings, counterparts to the creation trio, but with domains that were not physical. They would govern the inner world of consciousness. They would be the keepers of the mind, the heart, and the will. And they would be the ones to unite the fabric of time and space with the spark of life. These three would be born from Arceus's own essence, shaped with the same care that had created Dialga and Palkia. But this time they would carry a different kind of power. The first of these would be the embodiment of knowledge. The second would be the embodiment of willpower. And the third would be the embodiment of emotion. Together, they would form the conceptual bridge between the physical world and the living soul. Arceus knew that without them, the universe would remain a place of silent laws and cold equations. But with them, the universe would become a place where stories could unfold, where choices could be made, where love and loss and triumph and tragedy could find a home. And so the original one prepared to create not just the guardians of time and space, but the guardians of the very essence of consciousness. But there was a profound risk in this plan. By giving fragments of its own spirit to other beings, Arceus would be dividing its own awareness. It would be allowing a part of itself to become separate, to have its own identity, its own free will. The late guardians that would emerge from this act would not be puppets. They would have the power to choose, to think, to feel, and that meant they could also falter. They could misunderstand. They could fall into conflict. But Arceus accepted that risk, because a universe without the possibility of error is a universe without the possibility of growth. And so the spirit would be free. The next chapter in this story is about the first of these three beings, the one who would carry the gift of knowledge, and how that gift would shape the world forever. That is the tale of Uxie and the gift of knowledge. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. After shaping the universe with the pillars of time and space and casting the disruptive antimatter into its own shadow dimension, Arceus looked upon the cosmos it had built. Matter now existed. The stars burned, the planets turned, and the raw fabric of reality was stable, but something was missing. The machinery was perfect, yet hollow. There was no consciousness to perceive it, no will to explore it, no emotion to feel it. The universe was a magnificent clockwork without a soul, and so the original one conceived of a new kind of creation, one that would breathe spirit into the cold mechanics of existence. This was the birth of the late guardians, the triune essence of mind, and the first among them was Uxie, the being of pure knowledge. The creation of Uxie took place at a remote and frozen lake in the northern reaches of what would one day be called Sinnoh. This body of water, known now as Lake Acuity, was chosen not for its beauty, but for its stillness, in the same way that a calm pool reflects the sky without distortion. Uxie was meant to hold the clearest reflection of truth. Arceus formed this Pokémon from the purest crystal of thought, gathering fragments of cosmic logic that had been scattered during the original shaping of the universe. Where Dialga and Palkia had been crafted from the forces of time and space, Uxie was woven from something far more subtle, the very pattern of understanding itself. When Uxie opened its eyes for the first time, the world did not tremble. Instead, it grew quiet, as if the universe itself was listening. Uxie emerged from Lake Acuity not as a conqueror, but as a librarian. Its purpose was not to command the elements or reshape the land, but to bestow intelligence upon the fledgling life that had begun to stir in the primordial soup. In those early days, the first living beings were little more than stirring echoes of matter. Driven by instinct and chance, they drifted through the seas and across the barren continents. Without direction, without memory, without the ability to learn from their mistakes, they would starve in the presence of food, freeze near sources of warmth, and fall into traps they had escaped only moments before. Existence was a series of random events, and survival was a matter of luck. Arceus saw this chaos and understood that without knowledge, life could never rise beyond the sum of its accidents, and so Uxie began its silent work. It did not speak, for language had not yet been invented. Instead, it radiated a gentle, pulsing energy that spread across the world like a slow dawn. This energy touched the minds of the simplest beings, and where there had been only blank sensation, there now flickered the first sparks of awareness. A Magikarp that had once thrashed aimlessly now recalled the taste of a predator's shadow and fled before the attack came. A Geodude that had stood motionless for millennia learned to recognize the pattern of a falling boulder and shifted its position. Simple, yes, but revolutionary. For the first time, cause and effect were understood. The world was no longer a series of unrelated surprises. It became a puzzle that could be solved. This gift of knowledge was not given freely in the sense of a handout. Uxie did not fill the minds of creatures with preloaded facts or instinctive blueprints. Instead, it granted the capacity to learn, to remember, and to reason. It was the difference between a stone that rolls downhill and a creature that rolls uphill to avoid the storm. Uxie taught the first living beings that the past held lessons, and that those lessons could shape the future. With this power, the earliest Pokémon began to organize. They formed small communities based on shared experience, passing knowledge from one generation to the next. The first crude shelters were built. The first strategies for hunting and gathering were devised. The first bonds of cooperation formed not out of blind instinct, but out of recognized mutual benefit. Knowledge was the foundation upon which all civilization would be built. But Uxie's gift carried a shadow, and that shadow was woven into the very nature of its eyes. In the deepest lore, whispered among the oldest Sinnoh legends, there is a warning about the gaze of Uxie. Its eyes are said to hold the totality of all knowledge, past, present and future. Every truth that has ever been, and every truth that will ever be. To look directly into those eyes is to see the universe stripped of all illusion. It is a terrifying experience for the human mind, or any mind not designed for such vastness. Cannot bear the weight of absolute truth. The myths say that anyone who meets Uxie's gaze will have their memory erased completely, left as a blank slate, a mindless vessel wandering the world with no sense of self. But that is only the beginning of the horror. The deeper truth, the one that few dare to speak aloud, is that the erasure is not a punishment, it is a mercy. Because if you could withstand the initial flood of knowledge, if your mind did not shatter under the sheer volume of cosmic data, you would be granted a vision of what truly lies beyond the surface of reality. And that vision, legend says, is so terrible that the mind chooses to forget everything rather than live with that memory. What could be so awful? Some say it is the knowledge that all of existence is fragile, that the creation of the universe was a desperate gamble that could still fail. Others whisper that Uxie's eyes reveal the true nature of Arceus itself, a truth so incomprehensible that it would undo the very fabric of sanity. Whatever it is, the price of forbidden wisdom is not a curse upon the seeker. It is a voluntary burial of the soul's own light. The knowledge granted by Uxie, then, is a carefully curated gift. It is wisdom measured out in portions, enough to survive and thrive, but never enough to pierce the veil that hides the ultimate mysteries. And perhaps that is the greatest act of love that a god can offer. Not to reveal everything, but to protect its children from what they cannot yet bear. Uxie watches over Lake Acuity patient and silent, guarding the boundaries between useful knowledge and devastating truth. Those who approach seeking more than they are ready for will find their own reflections staring back from those calm waters. And, if they are wise, before the eyes beneath the surface opened fully, with the gift of knowledge, the first beings began to grow in complexity. They learned to name the seasons, to predict the weather, to recognize the patterns of the stars. They built tools, spoke in languages, and eventually began to question their own origins. Knowledge had given them the power to shape their world, but it also gave them the power to doubt. And doubt, in its purest form, is the seed of loneliness. For what is knowledge without someone to share it with? What is understanding without the warmth of a companion who feels the same wonder? Uxie had given the universe a mind, but the mind was still cold. It could calculate, it could remember, it could plan, but it could not feel joy in the sunrise or sorrow at the setting sun. The world was intelligent now, but it was not yet alive in the deepest sense of the word. And so Arceus looked upon the work of Uxie and saw that it was good but incomplete. The next step would require a being of a different nature entirely. One that could touch not the intellect, but the heart. For what is a universe full of knowing if it has no passion, no desire, no tenderness? The plan was already forming in the mind of the original one. A new creation that would dwell in another hidden lake, a place of warmth and reflection. There, the next piece of spirit would awaken, and the world would learn to feel. But that is a story for another chapter, one that will stir the quietest chambers of your own soul before the night is through. Knowledge gave the world its first light, but a universe built on logic alone is a profoundly cold and hollow place. Arceus had given its children the ability to perceive, to analyze, to remember. Every being created after Uxie's awakening could look at a mountain and know its height. They could watch a star and calculate its path across the sky, but they could not feel the grandeur of that mountain. They could not love the warmth of that star. Life was functional, it was efficient, it was productive, but it was utterly empty. The gears of the cosmos were turning, perfectly synchronized by Dialga's time and Palkia's space, but there was no heart inside the machine. There was no passion in the turning of its wheels. Arceus understood that knowledge without emotion is just data. It had created the observers. Now it needed to create the feelers. It needed to instill a force that would make beings cherish their own existence. But this was a dangerous gamble, perhaps the most dangerous one Arceus ever took. Cold logic is predictable. A creature acting on logic alone will always follow the most optimal path for survival and efficiency. Introduce emotion, however, and you introduce the unpredictable. You introduce the capacity for a creature to sacrifice itself for another. You introduce rage, melancholy, ecstasy, and heartbreak. This volatility was the very essence of chaos that Arceus had spent its power organizing at the dawn of existence. It was a step backward into the turbulence from which the egg had hatched, and yet it was absolutely necessary. Without it, the universe would be a museum of perfect, lifeless exhibits. To give life meaning, Arceus had to give it a heart. In the far northwest of the Sinnoh region lies Lake Verity. Its waters are some of the clearest in the world, reflecting the sky above it like a perfect mirror. The name Verity means truth, but this is not the hard, factual truth of Uxie, the truth of data and recollection. This is the personal, undeniable truth of how you feel. It was here that Arceus summoned the next fragment of its being. The air around the lake did not shudder with the weight of knowledge. Instead, it began to warm. A soft pink glow danced on the surface of the water, spreading out from the center in gentle, concentric ripples. Where Uxie's arrival was silent and still, Mesprit's emergence was filled with a soundless music, a vibration in the very soul of the world. It rose from the depths of the lake, a being of pure, untamed spirit. Its purpose was not to calculate. Its purpose was singular and sacred, to govern the heart. With Mesprit's arrival, the raw spectrum of feeling flooded into the world for the very first time. Joy was born as the sun crested a perfect peak. Sorrow settled into the world like a slow tide, teaching the first creatures what it meant to lose something precious. Empathy allowed one being to feel the suffering of another and answer the call to help. For the first time, a Pokémon could look at another and feel more than just recognition. It could feel companionship. It could feel love. It could feel the bitter sting of jealousy and the burning fire of devotion. Mesprit was the source of this river, and it flowed out from Lake Verity into every corner of the growing world, touching the very creatures Arceus had set into motion. Knowledge had given them the map. Now emotion gave them a reason to travel. Why was this volatility necessary? Because life requires risk. A creature that does not fear death has no instinct to survive. A creature that cannot feel loss has no reason to build a home. A creature devoid of joy has no reason to explore. Emotion is the crucible in which character is forged. It is the source of art, of music, of the deep bonds between humans and Pokémon that define the very core of this world. Without Mesprit, a trainer could command, but they could never truly bond. A Pokémon could battle, but it could never fight with heart. The shocking truth that connects back to Arceus' plan is this: the creator designed the universe to be felt, not just observed. The heart was the final validation of its work. And yet, even as the world began to hum with the energy of feeling, a new vacancy became clear. Emotion is a storm. It is powerful, but it is directionless without a rudder. What good is the capacity to feel joy if you lack the drive to pursue it? What worth is a heart full of love if you do not have the strength to protect what you love? The world had knowledge. The world had emotion, but it had no action. A being could stand on the shore of Lake Verity, longing to cross the water, knowing the way and feeling the desire, but unable to take the first step. The foundation of spirit needed one final cornerstone, a force that could channel raw emotion into decisive motion, a power that could turn the whisper of "I feel" into the declaration of "I will." This force was the strength of will itself, and it was destined to be forged in the deepest fire of the soul, resting in a place of great valor, waiting for its turn to awaken. But even with knowledge and emotion, there was still something missing. The world had intelligence, and it had feeling, but it lacked the force to turn thought into action, to transform sorrow into resolve, to push a creature forward when every instinct told it to stop. So Arceus, in its infinite wisdom, created a third being, one that would become the very engine of life's drive. At Lake Valor, a body of water known for its fierce currents and unyielding depth, a new Pokémon emerged from the sparkling ripples. It was Azelf, and its domain was willpower, the sheer unbreakable determination to act. Where Uxie had given the world the ability to know, and Mesprit the ability to feel, Azelf gave the ability to choose, to strive, to endure. Without will, knowledge is just abstract data, and emotion is just a fleeting storm. But with will, a creature can take that knowledge and that emotion and forge them into a purpose. The early world was harsh. Storms raged across the land, the seas churned with primal fury, and the very continents were still settling into their forms. Life, newly blessed with mind and heart, faced constant danger. A Pokémon could know that a predator stalked the shadows, and it could feel fear. But without willpower, it would freeze, paralyzed by that fear. Azelf's gift was the spark that turned fear into flight, that turned hunger into the hunt, that turned curiosity into exploration. It was the force that made life overcome the hardships of that unforgiving world. The Lake Guardians, as they came to be known, were not merely three separate entities. They were a trinity, the guardians of the spirit. Together, they formed the bridge between the raw matter of the universe and the conscious beings that would inhabit it. Uxie's knowledge provided the map, Mesprit's emotion provided the colour, and Azelf's willpower provided the feet to walk the path. Without all three, life would have been an incomplete mirror, a ghost in the machine. But with them, the first sparks of true existence, of spirit, were ignited. Azelf's power was not gentle. Willpower is not a soft thing. It is the grit that clenches the jaw when the world pushes back. It is the stubborn refusal to surrender, even when hope seems lost. In those early epochs, Azelf's influence manifested as the small, persistent actions of survival. A sea Pokémon learning to swim against a current, a rock Pokémon digging deeper into the earth to escape a predator. Each tiny victory, each refusal to give up, echoed Lake Vala's relentless waves. And so the Lake Trio watched over the growing tapestry of life, their lakes connected by the invisible threads of spirit. They did not rule, they guided, they inspired. They were the silent guardians of everything that made a creature more than a collection of cells. And as life spread across the land, as Dialga and Palkia retreated to their dimensional thrones, and as Giratina brooded in its distortion world, the world finally had what it needed to become something beautiful. But even the creator could see that its work was done for now. The universe was whole. The gods of time and space held the fabric, the guardians of spirit animated the threads, and life itself was beginning to weave its own story. Arceus had given everything it could, and so, with a quiet sigh that echoed through all dimensions, the original one prepared to rest, to fall into what the ancient texts would call the great slumber of the creator. That sleep would last eons, and the world would grow and change without its maker's direct hand. But the seeds had been planted, and they would grow. They always do. With the creation of Azelf at Lake Vala, the foundation was complete. Knowledge gave the world its memory, emotion gave the world its heart, and willpower gave the world its drive to move forward. The cosmic architecture was sound. The spiritual scaffolding was in place. Time was ticking. Space was expanding. Spirit was thriving. But for the architect who had drawn the blueprints entirely from its own being, this moment of completion was not a time for celebration. It was a time for utter depletion. Think about the scale of the undertaking. Arceus did not merely design a world. It became the mechanism by which the world could exist. Every law of physics that keeps a Voltorb from floating away into space, every law of nature that allows a Bidoof to gnaw a tree, every spark of consciousness in a wild Shinx, it all flowed from a single source, the first existence, the original one. Crafting time requires existing outside of it. Shaping space requires being greater than its volume. Defining spirit requires a soul vast enough to contain all the joy, all the sorrow, and all the will of every being that will ever live. This is the exhaustion of the creator, not a tiredness from a long day of labor, but the quieting of the cosmic furnace, the settling of the foundational stone. The myth of the Hisui region describes this moment with a specific weighty phrase. Arceus descended into a deep and inflexible sleep. It is a phrase that echoes through the oldest texts. Deep, uneachable, inflexible, unbreakable. This was not a nap from which it could be easily roused. It was an absolute severing from the active management of reality. The work was done. The governor had been removed. The universe was left to run on the rules that had been set in place. Why such a profound slumber? The act of creation required Arceus to fragment itself. It poured its power into the creation trio, into the lake guardians, into the very plates that define the elements. A significant portion of its divine essence was now walking around the world as independent beings. What was left was a core, a kernel of pure consciousness, requiring an age of stillness to recover. It is the ultimate act of trust. Or perhaps it is the ultimate act of resignation. The creator steps away so that the creation can grow on its own. The silence of a god creates a vacuum, and nature, as it always does, begins to abhor that vacuum. This brings us to one of the greatest mysteries in all of Pokémon lore. Where does a being that exists outside of space and time go to rest? The answer, according to the dimensions we can access, is a place called the Hall of Origin. But calling it a place is a generous term. It exists in a bubble of reality that intersects with our own only at specific celestial events, or when Arceus allows it to be found. The true mystery, the one that keeps scholars of Pokémon mythology returning to the texts, is not where Arceus sleeps, but what it dreams. If the universe was created from the substance of its being, then the universe itself might be the dream. Every evolutionary path every trainer's journey, every bond between a Pokémon and a person. Is this all the content of the creator's long slumber? Some speculate that our reality is merely the shadow cast by that cosmic dream, that every Pokémon we have ever met is a thought form, flickering in the mind of the sleeping god. And what happens when the dream shifts? When a nightmare passes through the consciousness of the creator? The Distortion world is often theorized to be a scar from a rough dream, a flaw in the reality that Arceus is quietly imagining. This is the uncomfortable truth of a world governed by a sleeping god. The highest power is unconscious. The great clockmaker has stopped winding the clock. With the creator asleep, the stage is set for a different kind of creation. Not a birth from an egg in the void, but an awakening from the planet itself. Deep in the crushing trenches of the ocean, and far beneath the tectonic plates of the continents, a pressure was building. An ancient war was about to begin. The very planet, sensing the void left by its sleeping master, began to generate its own champions. This is the story of the Primal Awakening, the rise of Groudon and Kyogre. With the great slumber of the creator came a profound silence across the cosmos. The raw scaffolding of existence was finally complete. Matter had found its proper place. Time was flowing in a steady river. Spirit had breathed consciousness into the silence. But the canvas of the world itself, the actual surface of this infant planet, was still a violent, unfinished masterpiece of shifting stone and endless water. It was in the stillness of the sleeping god that the deepest, most primal forces of the physical world began to stir. Not as conscious thought born from the lake guardians, but as pure elemental instinct. Far beneath the surface of the planet, in the molten engine of the Earth's core, an impossible pressure was building. This was not merely magma or tectonic stress. This was the concentrated will of the world itself. The absolute desire of stone to rise toward the sun. From this crucible of metal and fire, a being was forged. It was not directly carved by Arceus's 1,000 arms. It was by the planet in its chaotic infancy, a reaction to the cooling of the crust. This was Groudon, the continent Pokémon. Its body was a lattice of volcanic crystal and obsidian. Its blood the boiling iron of the deep mantle. It did not crawl from a cave. It erupted from the very concept of land itself, a beast whose heartbeat was the shudder of tectonic plates and whose fists were the rising of mountains. Groudon was the Earth's hunger for expansion, the desire of rock to dominate the horizon. At the exact same moment, in the crushing, absolute blackness of the deepest oceanic trenches, where no light has ever touched, and the weight of the world presses down without mercy, another consciousness awakened. The sea had a will of its own. It was a will of patience and depth, of unending hunger to swallow the light. Kyogre was born from this abyss, a being of pure liquid pressure, of impossible volume and ancient cold. Its very existence was a monsoon, a tide pulling against the shore, a flood waiting to be unleashed, while Groudon was the fire of the earth's soul. Kyogre was the weight of every ocean, the memory of every drowned world. These two titans rose from the deepest places of the planet, unaware of each other at first, but destined to define one another. Where the creation trio had woven the fabric of time and space, Groudon and Kyogre did something different. They walked the creation and reshaped it with every step. They became the secondary architects of the planet's surface. There was no blueprint for the coastlines or the mountains. That blueprint was written by their conflict. Groudon would emerge from the earth and begin its work of expansion. It would raise the land, pulling entire continents from the seafloor. With its volcanic might, it baked the seabed into new earth. It was an architect of stone, a sculptor working in granite and basalt. Wherever Groudon walked, deserts spread, mountain ranges stabbed the sky, and the horizons grew wider. But Kyogre was the counter-current to that fire. It swam through the deep currents, flooding the lowlands, erasing Groudon's work with a patient and relentless pressure. It eroded the cliffs, deepened the ocean basins, and filled the atmosphere with an endless rain. The shape of every continent, every peninsula, every coastline we know today is the scarred history of this conflict. They did not simply live in the environment. They were the living embodiment of the environment's own desire to create and destroy itself. They were the second act of creation, the sculpting of the planet's flesh. And of course, two forces this powerful, so perfectly opposite in their nature, could not exist in the same world without collision. That collision was inevitable. It was written into the fundamental laws of the primal world. Where the land ends, the sea begins. Where the sea recedes, the land advances. Their war was not a quarrel over territory or dominance. It was a cosmic argument, a geological debate. Groudon would forge a massive continent, pulling it from the depths with the heat of 1,000 volcanoes. And Kyogre would drown it beneath a mile of salt water. Kyogre would summon a perpetual storm, a cyclone that wrapped around the entire globe, and Groudon would crack the earth open to absorb the rain and boil the seas away. Their battle shook the planet to its molten core. Volcanic eruptions split the land while tidal waves erased entire islands. The sky turned red with volcanic ash and black with the monstrous clouds of Kyogre's rage. The collision between the land and the sea was absolute. It was the first great catastrophe of the Pokémon world. A war of elements that threatened to break the young planet apart before life could ever truly take hold. There was no victor, only an endless, grinding stalemate between the stone and the tide. The balance could not be found by them. It was not in their nature to compromise. The earth expands, the sea erodes. That is the law. And because they could not stop, because their war grew so fierce that it threatened the very frame of the planet, a third force had to step in, high above the chaos, in the thin, cold vansar of atmosphere. A being had been born from the stratosphere itself. It was a dragon of the sky, formed from the ozone layer and the electromagnetic energy of the spinning world. It watched the endless war from its lofty perch, understanding that the land and sea had no natural mediator. They would simply fight until the world was a barren rock or a lifeless ocean. And so, when the collision of the primal titans threatened to break the world apart at its seams, this creature of the sky was compelled to descend. It faced the fury of the continent and the ocean alone. This is the story of the sky's intervention and of the ancient Dragman who gave the world its first taste of peace. Up next, the legend of Rayquaza. The war between Groudon and Kyogre raged without mercy, defining the very shape of the world through conflict. One fought to pull continents from the sea, the other to drown the land beneath endless waves. The planet was a battlefield of extremes, where no middle ground could exist. Life on the surface, still young, was caught between the boiling earth and the rising tide. It seemed the world would tear itself apart, unable to reconcile the two fundamental forces that had created it. And then the sky intervened. Far above the chaos, in the thin, cold membrane of the upper atmosphere, there was a presence that had watched silently since the earliest days. The ozone layer is not merely a chemical shield. It is the boundary between fragile life and the raw violence of space. It filters the cosmic rays. It holds the air tight against the world. And from this sacred boundary, a being of immense power emerged. Rayquaza, a serpentine dragon, whose home is the heavens themselves. It did not hatch from an egg buried in the earth, or rise from the pressure of the deep oceans. Rayquaza was born from the very fabric of the sky, a guardian formed at the edge of existence. Its body is said to be older than the mountains, older than the sea trenches, because the sky has always been there, wrapping the world in a protective embrace. Rayquaza feeds on the meteoroids that threaten the planet, consuming space debris before it can cause cataclysm. It is the ozone layer given form, the living will of the atmosphere. When Groudon and Kyogre brought their primal war to its peak, the planet cried out for balance, and the sky answered. Rayquaza descended from the heavens with a presence that was absolute. It did not take sides. It offered no compromise. It simply asserted a higher order. In a single decisive intervention, the Sky Dragon forced the Titans apart. The role of the ozone layer's protector in quelling the primal war was not one of destruction, but of enforcement. Rayquaza reminded the earth and sea that they were part of a whole. The world was not theirs to unmake, and in this act, we witness a profound mirror of the original balance established by Arceus. When Arceus shaped the universe, it created Dialga and Palkia as opposing forces of time and space, and then Giratina to govern the balance between them. The Lake Guardians were formed to bind spirit to matter. Arceus understood that creation required counterweight. Groudon and Kyogre were the architects of the physical world, but without a third force to regulate them, they became engines of chaos. Rayquaza is that third force. How Rayquaza's power mirrors the balancing act established by Arceus is undeniable. Where Arceus is the cosmic architect, the source of all law, Rayquaza is the living execution of that law, the sentinel that ensures the primal elements do not consume each other. The stabilization of the planet's climate and geography followed immediately. The harsh sunlight that boiled the oceans receded. The endless rain that flooded the continents ceased. The earthquakes stopped. The volcanoes fell silent. For the first time since creation, the world knew a lasting peace. The atmosphere, once torn between extremes, settled into a temperate equilibrium. The land and sea healed. Under the watchful gaze of the Sky Ruler, the planet was given the stability it needed for complex life to flourish. The continents assumed their familiar shapes. The oceans found their boundaries. The world became a garden instead of a forge, but this stability came at a cost of presence. After the intervention, Rayquaza returned to its domain high above the clouds. It did not withdraw from duty, but it no longer needed to walk among the lands it protected. It slumbers in the ozone layer, circling the globe in a perpetual vigil, waiting for the day the balance might be threatened again. Just as Arceus entered a deep and inflexible sleep after the universe was formed, Rayquaza too entered a long watch, a living promise that the sky will never abandon the world it was created to guard. But how do we know this truth with such certainty? The evidence is not just carved into the land by ancient battles, it is written down. In the heart of the Sinnoh region, in the quiet island town of Canalave, there stands a library that holds the accumulated memory of the Pokémon world. Its shelves contain records passed down through generations, documents that trace the genealogy of the legendary Pokémon and the first age of the world. They speak of the war, they speak of the sky intervention, they speak of the very nature of reality itself. Up next is Chapter 18, the Canalave Library Records, where we will read between the lines of these ancient texts and see what they reveal about the hidden structure of the universe Arceus built. Rayquaza's intervention brought a fragile peace to the world, a treaty written in fire, sea foam and sky currents. But peace, like history, is only as stable as the records that keep it. And in the Sinnoh region, the oldest records are not carved into living stone, but bound in cracked leather and layers of dust within the Canalave Library. It is here, on the oldest island in the region, that we find humanity's earliest attempt to understand what happened before the skies cleared. Tonight, we are analysing the oldest written myths found in the Sinnoh region. The Canalave Library is a vessel of faith and fear. On its shelves sit the mythology of Sinnoh, the old verse, the texts that speak of the original one. But every time a legend is written down, it is filtered through the hand of the scribe. The ancient kings of Sinnoh, the clans of Hisui, they all tried to capture the infinite power of a creator in a finite language. And language, as Uxie teaches us, is a cage for knowledge. It gives it shape, but it strips it of its true dimension. This is the central problem we face when we study the Veilstone myth and the other ancient texts. How human interpretation has potentially skewed the true history of Arceus becomes clearest in the very first words of the creation story. The texts tell us a single egg emerged in a vortex of chaos. The texts tell us the being within had 1,000 arms. But what is an egg to a being that exists outside of time? What is an arm to a force that can hold the fabric of space itself? The scribe wrote what he understood. He saw a dragon, a serpent, a god, but he did not see the form of Arceus. He saw the shadow it cast into a mind, that could only comprehend linear sequence. The hidden meanings behind the Veilstone myth and other ancient texts are buried beneath these metaphors. The Veilstone is the most direct account, the one treated as holy scripture, but look closely at its phrasing. It says Arceus, but Arceus was not born in the biological sense. Arceus, there is a deep and fundamental difference. Birth implies a parent, a lineage, a time before the being. Emergence implies a manifestation, a crystallization of will from the void itself. Human interpretation seized on the word birth because it is comfortable, it fits the cycle of life. But this subtle skew, this single word choice, changes everything. It makes the creator a character in the story of the world, rather than the very stage upon which the story is performed. What if the hidden meaning of the myth is that the 1,000 arms are not literal limbs, but the fundamental forces of reality? Dialga is an arm, Palkia is an arm, Giratina is an arm. The Lake Guardians are the fingers that weave spirit into matter. The myth describes a physical body, but the hidden truth is that it is recording a framework. Arceus did not stop creating. The myth records a past event, but it hides the present reality. The creator is still here, holding the universe together in a silent, active meditation. The sleep of Arceus described in the text is not an absence. It is a different state of presence, one that the ancient scribes could only describe by using the most familiar concept they knew: rest. The records in the Canalave library also struggle with the connection between Arceus and all other life. They hint at the idea that Arceus created, but they miss the intimate nature of that creation. We know from the Hisui era that all Pokémon are fragments of the original one. The library texts do not have this clarity. They externalize the creation. They see Dialga and Palkia as separate servants, not extensions. They see the Lake Guardians as spirits, not conscience. The true history, the shocking truth, is that the division between creator and creation is an illusion enforced by time. In the beginning, there was only one. The many came later, but they never truly left the one. To truly understand the myth, we cannot just read the words of the Canalave scribes. We must understand the framework they were trying to describe, and they left us a guide. The ancient texts refer to the plates, the tablets of type and rule that fell from the heavens. These plates are not just artifacts. They are the grammar of reality. They are the instructions left behind for the world to read. The scribes saw them as relics, but the plates are the key to the entire puzzle. They are the logic of the creator made manifest, and the deeper we look into them, the closer we get to the mind behind the universe. The answer to every question we have uncovered tonight lies in the structure of the 18 plates of lore. It is a structure that has been waiting for us to read it correctly since the very first word was written on paper. The Canalave library holds the accounts, but the accounts are just the echo of the tremor, not the earthquake itself. To truly understand the creation of this world, you cannot just look at what was written by human hands. You have to look at the physical evidence left behind by the original architect. You have to study the plates. When Arceus emerged from that egg in the absolute void of nothing, it did not arrive empty-handed. It did not arrive as a blank slate. The plates were already there. They are the first delineation of chaos into order. The egg did not just hatch a being, it hatched a complete system of rules. The old myths speak of 1,000 arms, but the number arms implies a physical limitation. The plates represent something far more profound. They represent the infinite potential of reality collapsing into defined, stable laws. Across time, as the universe matured, that infinite potential stabilized itself into 18 fundamental expressions. 18 plates, 18 laws. This is not mythology. This is the operating system of reality. Think carefully about what a plate actually is. You are not picking up a stone from the earth in the way you might pick up a fossil or a gem. A fossil is a remnant of a life that once lived. A gem is a structure of compressed minerals. A plate is a piece of the original thought that created the universe. Before time had a name, the Draco plate already defined the concept of lineage and pride. Before space had expanded, the spooky plate already defined the void, the space between atoms, the quiet darkness that exists when no light touches. The plates are solidified metaphysics. They are the original framework upon which the entire world was written. This is the revelation that transforms our entire understanding of the power structure of the Pokémon world. Each plate represents a specific fragment of Arceus' original power. When Arceus shaped the world, it did not stand outside the world and push it into place. It inverted itself. It pulled itself apart. It scattered its own soul across the fabric of existence so that the world could exist as a separate, living thing. Each plate is a core memory of the creator. The fist plate is not just a boost to fighting type moves. It is the law of combat. It is the principle of honorable struggle. The will to overcome through direct strength. The mind plate is pure consciousness, the rule that governs psychic space, the ability for thought to exert force upon matter. This implies a terrifying and beautiful truth about the physics of the world. The flame plate governs fire. Yes, but fire is simply a rapid release of energy. It governs the transfer of potential into kinetic action. It is the rule of thermodynamics written into a stone. The splash plate controls the flow, the currents of the deep, the very state of liquid matter, and the cycle of water that shapes continents. The earth plate is gravity itself. It is the stability of the ground, the pressure that forms mountains, the unyielding foundation that stops the world from dissolving back into that original chaos. The iron plate is the strength of the molecular bond. It is hard science. It is magic. It is philosophy. All of it. 18 distinct laws holding the universe together. This explains why the plates transform Arceus itself. When the original one holds the meadow plate, it is not simply borrowing a grass-type power. It is temporarily reintegrating the law of nature and growth directly into its core being. It becomes the living embodiment of that specific physical law once more. It becomes the essence of growth, of roots finding soil, of leaves reaching for the sun. Arceus is the only being that can do this, because Arceus is the only being that these laws, the plates, are the fingerprints of the divine, pressed directly into the atoms of reality. Now we must address the old contradiction, the Mew Contradiction. For generations, science believed Mew was the ancestor of all Pokémon, because Mew contains the genetic code of every species. This is a logical conclusion based on biology, but biology is not the deepest layer. The plates are the layer beneath biology. Before there could be DNA, there had to be a law that dictated how DNA could fold and express itself. The plates are the source code. Mew is the first successful compiler of that code. Every Pokémon species that exists is a running instance of the program that was written by the 18 plates. Mew contains the map of all life. Arceus created the territory that the map describes. This scattering of divine essence was a deliberate act of creation, but it was also a profound vulnerability. When you fragment your own soul and scatter the pieces across time and space, you give up absolute control. You allow the world to run on its own. You fall into that deep and inflexible sleep, not because you are tired, but because you have given away the power required to stay conscious. The world lives because the Creator sleeps, but the plates never truly sleep. They sit in the earth. They drift in the void. They wait. And because they are fragments of a living will, they resonate with something deeper. They can be collected, they can be understood, and they can be demanded. This fragile balance between the sleeping Creator and the active laws of its scattered power would eventually lead to a moment of terrible conflict. A moment where a mortal dared to ask the divine for loan of that power. A moment where the Creator itself had to bleed. An incident that history remembers, not as the law of the plates, but as the duel of life. We left off with the 18 plates, each one a law of nature, a fragment of the power that shaped the universe. And yet, as profound as those plates are, there is another object, another artifact, that holds a singular place in the story of Arceus. An object that would become the center of the deepest wound the original one ever felt. An object known as the Jewel of Life. Imagine a time when the earth was still young, when the land was raw and fertile, but not yet teeming with the life we know today. Arceus, having shaped the cosmos and entrusted the laws of time and space to Dialga and Palkia, having placed the guardians of spirit, Uxie, Azelf, Mesprit, into the lakes of Sinnoh, had withdrawn into a deep sleep. But the world did not stand still. Humans emerged, and they struggled. They faced drought, famine, and the harshness of a world still being formed. In one corner of the ancient world, a tribe of humans, the ancestors of those who would one day live in Michina, found themselves on the brink of extinction. The land around them was barren, the soil lifeless. They prayed to the Creator, not knowing if their voices could reach a being that had slumbered for eons, and Arceus heard them. In a moment that would echo through history, the original one was moved by their desperation. It chose to intervene directly, not by shaping the land from afar, but by offering a piece of itself. From its own body, Arceus forged a crystalline orb, a jewel of pure creation. This was the jewel of life. It was not just a source of energy, it was a fragment of Arceus's own life force, a concentration of its power to heal and sustain. Arceus placed this jewel into the hands of the human leader, a man named Deimos, and made a simple pact. Use this jewel to restore the land, to make it bloom, and after a year, return it to me. The land flourished. Fields turned green, rivers appeared where there were none, and the people thrived. It was a golden age for that tribe, thanks entirely to the borrowed power of the god that had created them. But the year passed, and when it came time for Deimos to return the jewel of life, something went terribly wrong. The historical account, the one that Arceus itself witnessed, tells us that Deimos broke his promise. He kept the jewel for himself and his people. But the deeper truth, the one that would only be uncovered millennia later, is that Deimos was not entirely to blame. A figure of immense cunning, a man named Marcus, had used the power of a Pokémon, a psychic type, to enslave Deimos' will, compelling him to refuse the return. To Arceus, however, all it saw was betrayal. The humans it had saved, the humans it had trusted with a piece of its own being, had stolen from it. And a god who has been betrayed feels the same fire of anger that any mortal would, but with a power that could shatter continents. That anger was a new thing for Arceus. It had never felt such a thing before. In its existence, it had only known purpose, the creation of order, the balance of forces. But now it knew the sting of ingratitude, the sharp edge of broken trust. And in that moment, the original one declared that it would return to the world in exactly 100 years. And when it did, it would pass judgment on all of humanity. It would take back the life it had given, erasing not just the land of Michina, but every trace of the human race from the planet. This was the consequence of a god feeling a mortal emotion, a righteous, terrible vengeance. How did this event shape Arceus' view of the bond between humans and Pokémon? Before the Jewel of Life incident, Arceus had no reason to doubt that the creatures it had created, including humans, could coexist in harmony. But after that betrayal, a shadow fell across its perception. It saw humans as fickle, capable of great kindness, but also of deep treachery. The bond between human and Pokémon, which is often portrayed as pure friendship, now had a stain. Arceus began to question whether it had made a mistake in giving life to beings that could so easily break a sacred oath. For centuries, Arceus held on to that grudge, nursing its anger in the void between dimensions, waiting for the moment of reckoning. But the story does not end in fire and judgment. As time passed and as the 100-year deadline approached, a young human, a descendant of Deimos, would attempt to right the wrong, and Arceus, even in its fury, would be forced to confront something it had not anticipated: the capacity for redemption. The Jewel of Life would be returned, not by force, but by a sacrifice that mirrored the original gift. And in that moment, the god's view of humanity softened, just a fraction. Yet the lesson lingered, that love and trust, once broken, are not easily repaired. Arceus learned that the bond between humans and Pokémon is not a given. It must be earned, and once earned, it must be cherished. This incident, this betrayal and near apocalypse, set the stage for every encounter Arceus would later have with humans. It is the reason why, in the ages that followed, the original one chose to remain hidden, testing those who sought it with rituals and trials. It is why a simple flute, an Azure flute, became the key to reaching the god, not a weapon or a prayer, but a melody that recalled the original harmony. That flute, and the mystery of why it was never truly used in recorded history, will pull us deeper into the heart of the Arceus mythos. The jewel of life may have been returned, but the scars of that betrayal still echo in the silence between the stars. After the betrayal of Machina Town, when Arceus felt the full weight of human deceit, it withdrew. The anger and vengeance nearly consumed the world, but ultimately the creator retreat. Not just geographically, but metaphysically, the mortal realm was left to its own devices. A silent universe where prayers seemed to fall on deaf ears. The gulf between the people of Sinnoh and their god had become an abyss. How do you apologize to the architects of reality? How do you even get their attention when they have turned their back on you entirely? This is the question that defines the legend of the Azure Flute. The answer lies not in a weapon, not in a tribute of gold, but in an instrument of pure sound. The Azure Flute is the single thread connecting the world of mortals to the Hall of Origin. This artifact is the only known key that can unlock the dimensional seal Arceus placed upon its throne. Without its song, the path to the creator is utterly inert. The flute itself is a marvel of forgotten craftsmanship. It appears to be carved from a substance that resembles the sky at twilight, a deep and shifting azure that seems to hold the light of a distant star within its crystalline body. It is an object of immense age, predating the known civilization of Sinnoh by millennia. But what makes the Azure Flute truly unique is its voice. To blow into it is not just to produce a note, but to utter a word in the language of creation itself. This is the artifact required to bridge the gap between the mortal realm and the Hall of Origin. The Hall of Origin is not a place you can walk to, or sail to, or fly to in the conventional sense. It sits atop a dimension that exists parallel to our own, a space beyond the reach of Dialga's time and Palkia's space. To get there, reality itself must part, and only the specific vibrations of the Azure Flute can command that parting. It is a tuning fork for the universe, aligning our frequency with that of the original one. Without it, the Hall of Origin remains a ghost, a legend whispered in the Canalave library, a place that exists but cannot be touched. So why is the sound the only key to awakening the creator? The myths tell us that before the universe, there was only a swirling chaos of nothingness. The first event was the breaking of that nothingness, the resonance of Arceus hatching from its egg. That first tone echoed outward, creating the very fabric of reality. Sound is the fundamental force that shaped everything. The Azure Flute replicates that original tone of creation. Arceus does not respond to words, because words are a later invention of the mortals who betrayed it. Words are full of lies, full of broken promises, but sound, pure frequency, cannot be faked. It responds to the music of its own beginning, the sound that set the stars in motion. This brings us to the ritualistic importance of music in Pokémon mythology. Music is a constant theme woven into the fabric of Sinnoh's history. Consider the Lake Guardians. Uxie gives knowledge, Azelf gives willpower, Mesprit gives emotion. What act combines knowledge, will, and emotion into a single coherent expression? Playing a musical instrument. The hero who would wield the Azure Flute must not only know the notes from a scroll, they must feel them with the right will and the right heart. A hollow imitation or a selfish request will produce a silent flute. The flute will only sing for a soul that is in perfect harmony with the principles of the universe. It is a test of character as much as it is a key. The ritual itself is a meditation of the highest order. The player stands at the highest peak of the known world, or in some legends, within the ancient ruins of the Sinjo region, where the three continents of time, space, and distortion meet. As the song begins, the air changes. The sound of the flute does not travel through the air normally. It carves a path through reality. The sky splits, revealing a staircase made of rain and light, a bridge of pure crystallized sound. This is the entrance to the Hall of Origin. This stairway is not a physical structure of stone or wood. It exists only as long as the music sustains it. The journey upwards requires continuous playing, a walk of faith rising on the voice of the flute. One missed note, one waver in breath, and the path collapses. The mystery of the Azure flute is shrouded in the lost history of the Celestica people, the ancient civilization of Hisui. They are the culture that seem to understand this connection best. They are the ones who crafted the flute, or perhaps received it directly from the hands of Arceus before the betrayal. They understood that Arceus was not a god of stone and temple, but a god of law, a god of vibration. The Celestica people have long since vanished, and their sacred music died with them, leaving only the artifact and the faded carvings of a musical score no one can read. It is a language of sound that has been completely forgotten by modern humanity. In our current time, in the world of Pokémon, the physical Azure flute exists. It is held in the collection of a few select trainers, distributed as a treasure from a bygone era, but the knowledge is gone. No trainer has ever successfully made the flute sound with the true purpose required to open the hall. The item sits in the bag with no prompt to play. It is a locked door because the player character does not know the right song. The hero is missing the piece of the Celestica legacy required to breathe life into the instrument. The creator remains asleep to us, the path invisible. The flute is a dead relic in our hands, a constant reminder of the rift between human and God. But sound does not simply disappear, it echoes. And the echoes of that ancient melody are what create the highest drama in the known history of the Pokémon world. When the flute is played incorrectly, or when a selfish soul tries to force the note, the dimensional walls do not open to the Hall of Origin. Instead, they tear. The sound creates a scar in reality, a raw wound in the sky that we know as the space-time rift. This rift is the central crisis of the ancient Hisui region. It is a tear pouring out the raw energies of the Distortion world, the domain of Giratina. It threatens to unmake everything. The hero of Hisui, the one sent by Arceus specifically to investigate this rift, is the key to understanding the true function of the flute. They are the one who must bridge the gap that the Azure flute was meant to bridge. Not just with music, but with action, with a pure heart that proves humanity has learned from its betrayal. The flute is the catalyst for the entire chain of events that pulls a soul from the distant future into the heart of that ancient chaos. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. The Azure flute was the final key, the melody that could open the holiest of doors. It was the sound that could reach the Hall of Origin, a place suspended above the very peak of Mount Coronet. And yet, for all its power, the flute was a passive tool. It required someone worthy, someone with a pure heart to play it. The creator would not answer a summons lightly. But what if you had a more direct line? What if Arceus itself reached out, not through a forgotten flute, but through a glowing device that appeared in your hand? That is exactly what happened in the Hisui region, an ancient land that would one day be called Sinnoh. The Hisui region was not a peaceful place when the first settlers arrived. The land was wild, untamed, and the very fabric of reality seemed to be tearing apart at the seams. A massive rift in the sky, a wound in space and time itself, poured energy into the world. Pokémon became frenzied, storms raged, and the boundaries between dimensions blurred. This was the space-time rift, and it was a direct consequence of a conflict among the creation trio themselves. Dialga and Palkia, the gods of time and space, were locked in a struggle that threatened to undo existence, and Giratina, banished to the Distortion world, was also stirring. The balance that Arceus had established was breaking, and then a human fell from the sky. Not a native of Hisui, but a traveller pulled from a future era. This was the fated human, the one chosen by Arceus to set things right. This was the first time the original one had ever directly intervened in human history by sending a person through time. Think about the significance of that. Arceus had created the universe, shaped the world, and then retreated into a deep sleep, leaving the running of reality to its creations. It had briefly awakened to confront the betrayal of the Jewel of Life, but even then, it did not cross the boundaries of time. But something about the crisis in Hisui was different. Perhaps it was the fact that the space-time rift threatened to unravel the very threads of history, or perhaps Arceus saw an opportunity to forge a new bond with humanity. Whatever the reason, it reached down from its haul and pulled a soul across centuries. That traveller was given a device, the Arc Phone. At first glance, it looks like a modern smartphone, but in the ancient world of Hisui, it was an anomaly. It was a piece of technology from a future that did not yet exist, but its purpose was not simply communication between people. The Arc Phone was a direct link to Arceus. Through it, the fated human received guidance, missions, and knowledge. It was a divine communication tool, a tangible extension of Arceus's will. The phone would glow, produce maps of the region, list tasks that needed to be completed, and even grant the ability to see the world from a new perspective. But its most important function was to serve as proof that the fated human was under the protection of the Creator. When the people of Hisui saw that device, they knew that this stranger from the sky carried the authority of Arceus. The events that unfolded in Hisui were not random. They were a carefully orchestrated plan to restore balance. Arceus had seen the future. It knew that the conflict between Dialga and Palkia would create a rift that could not be mended by any of its existing creations. The Lake Guardians could not calm it. The creation trio themselves were the cause. So the Creator chose a human, not one of its own kind, but a mortal, to heal the wounds of time and space. Why a human? Because humans possess something that even the gods sometimes lacked: adaptability, courage, and the capacity to form bonds with every kind of Pokémon. The fated human was not sent to fight the gods with brute force, but to understand them, to calm their fury, and to show them that the world they were tearing apart was worth saving. The space-time rift was a symptom of a deeper imbalance. Dialga and Palkia had lost sight of their purpose. They were meant to maintain the flow of time and the fabric of space, not to engage in eternal struggle. Giratina, locked away in its own dimension, added its own fury to the mix. The fated human had to journey across Hisui, collect the plates that Arceus had scattered, and prove themselves worthy of the trust placed in them. With each plate collected, the Arc Phone would unlock more of Arceus's instructions, and at the climax, the human would face Dialga and Palkia directly, not to defeat them, but to quell their rage, and they would succeed. The rift was sealed, time and space were restored, and the bond between humanity and Pokémon in Hisui was forever changed. The Arc Phone was more than just a tool. It was a symbol of Arceus's new relationship with humanity. After the betrayal of the Jewel of Life, the Creator had every reason to despise humans, but instead, it chose to trust one, to give them a device that carried its own power, and to send them into the most dangerous period of history. The phone was a constant reminder that the fated human was never alone. It was a guide, a map, and a communicator, but it was also a test. Would the human use this power wisely? Would they prove that humanity had learned from its past mistakes? The answer, as history would record, was yes. The hero of Hisui succeeded, and Arceus rewarded them not with destruction, but with the chance to return at home, carrying the memories of their journey. But there was another layer to this story. In the aftermath of the space-time rift, Arceus revealed something extraordinary: that all Pokémon are fragments of its original form. When it created the world with 1,000 arms, it shattered itself into countless pieces, and those pieces became the first Pokémon. Every species, every type, every living creature that would later evolve and adapt, all of them carry a piece of the original one within them. The plates that the fated human collected are the purest forms of those pieces, each representing a fundamental law of nature. The Arcphone was able to detect them because it too was a fragment of Arceus's will. This revelation changes everything we thought we knew about the origin of life in the Pokémon world. For years, the accepted truth was that Mew was the ancestor of all Pokémon, a tiny pink creature whose DNA contained the blueprint for every species. But the Hisui records and the words of Arceus itself suggest a different story. Mew may still be unique, a powerful and ancient Pokémon, but it is not the source. The source is Arceus, the first existence, the being that emerged from an egg in absolute nothingness. And if Arceus is the ancestor of all Pokémon, then the events of Hisui take on an even deeper meaning. The fated human was not just saving a region. They were helping to preserve the integrity of the creator's own being. The Arcphone was the conduit for that relationship. It is the only artifact in Pokémon history that served as a direct communication line between a mortal and the creator of the universe. The Azure Flute was a request for an audience. The Arcphone was a call answered immediately. It represents a new covenant, a second chance for humanity to prove that they are worthy of the gifts Arceus has given them. And it worked. The hero of Hisui, a human from a distant future, became a legend in the past. Their deeds are recorded in the annals of history, and the scars of the space-time rift were healed. But there is a contradiction buried in these texts, puzzle that emerges when you compare the story of Mew with the revelations of Hisui. If Mew is not the ancestor, then what is it? How did it acquire the ability to learn any move, to transform its cells into any Pokémon? And why did the scientific community believe for so long that it was the original life form? The answer may lie in the nature of the fragments themselves. Perhaps Mew is a fragment that retained a unique property, a piece of Arceus that carried the memory of creation in its DNA. Or perhaps there is something else, a deeper layer to the origin story that has been hidden since the beginning. That is the mystery we will turn to next, the Mew Contradiction. The hero of Hisui has given us one truth, but it has opened the door to a question that may be even more profound. The hero of Hisui succeeded in quelling the space-time rift, stabilizing the very fabric of the world at the request of the creator. But the echoes of that encounter do not fade into history quietly. They vibrate through the walls of every ancient ruin, every fossil bed, and every laboratory that has ever tried to understand the true origin of Pokémon life. For a very long time, the scientific consensus was absolute. Mew is the ancestor of all Pokémon. This was not simply a theory whispered among researchers in Kanto. It was considered the foundational truth of evolutionary biology within the entire world. Every strand of DNA extracted from fossilized amber, every common genetic marker found deep within the cellular structure of species from every region pointed back to one singular source. Mew's genetic code was a master key, containing the blueprints for every Pokémon that would ever exist. The conclusion seemed undeniable. Life began there, but the mythology of Arceus places a weight directly onto that assumption, a pressure that cracks the foundation of the biological theory. Because Arceus did not emerge from a parent, it did not inherit a single strand of DNA. It hatched from an egg that manifested from a complete void, a swirling pool of nothingness that existed before the concepts of time and space themselves. Arceus is not a biological organism in the way we understand life. It is a cosmic event, a primeval presence that gave itself form. It has no predecessor. It has no genetic history. It simply is. This creates a deep and fascinating contradiction. How can the true ancestor of all life be a being that exists entirely outside the boundaries of biology? The word itself implies a chain of inheritance, a lineage of birth and descent. Mew fits perfectly into that chain, but Arceus stands before the chain entirely. It built the forge where the chain was first smelted. The resolution to this paradox lies in a gentle redefinition of the hierarchy. Arceus is the architect of reality. It created the fundamental laws, the elements, the dimensions of space and time, and the very spark of spirit that animates matter. Within this framework, the first biological clock began to tick. The first cell divided, The first conscious life form drew breath. That life form was Mew. Mew is not the original one in the cosmic sense. Mew is the first biological life form, created the universe that Arceus built. It is the moment the abstract laws of physics became living flesh. Consider the 18 plates that define the elemental forces of the world. They represent the rules written by the Creator. Fire, water, electricity, darkness, all of these are laws. Mew exists as the ultimate expression of life learning those rules. It can master any technique, adapt to any environment, and vanish without a trace. It is the purest biological vessel, the first player in the game of life. Its DNA holds the potential for every subsequent adaptation because it was the first to hold that potential. It is the origin of the family tree, but Arceus is the one who planted the seed of the tree itself. This distinction explains why the ancient peoples of Hisui and Sinnoh never spoke of Mew in their founding myths. They spoke of the Lake Guardians, who gave spirit to the world. They spoke of the creation trio, who wove time and space. Their faith was focused on the cosmic architect. Mew belongs to a different kind of discovery. It is the treasure of the modern age, found not through devotion, but through the microscope. The law of Arceus is a truth of faith and origin. The law of Mew is a truth of science and material descent. This duality is not a conflict. It is a beautiful harmony. Arceus shaped the vessel of reality, and then, into that vessel, through the natural workings of the forces that had been created, the very first life sparked into being. That life was Mew, a physical fragment of the Creator's power, choosing to manifest in the material realm. Mew is not a deity in competition with Arceus. Mew is the miracle of genetics made whole, the purest expression of life that the laws of the universe would allow. If Mew is the ancestor of every living Pokémon, then Arceus is the ancestor of Mew, not through a chain of DNA, but through a direct and literal act of cosmic creation. Mew's DNA is the living memory of that act. It remembers the chaos of the beginning. It remembers the song that ordered the universe. And every creature that descended from Mew carries a note of that same song. This brings us to the edge of a much deeper revelation, a concept that suggests that every single Pokémon, walking, swimming, or flying through the world, is not simply a descendant of a common biological ancestor. It suggests something far more intimate. It suggests that the Creator is not separate from the creation, but that every living thing is a direct piece of the architect, a shard of the original form. This is the threshold we stand upon. The idea that Mew is the bridge between the divine and the physical, the first biological being born from a cosmic foundation. And it is this very relationship that leads us directly to the most profound realization of all, an idea that redefines the very meaning of lineage and inheritance in the Pokémon universe. It is the ultimate connection between Arceus and everything that breathes, and it awaits us in the next chapter, the shocking revelation, the Fragment theory. We've spent the last chapter untangling the mystery of Mew, that ancient ancestor whose DNA seemed to echo through every Pokémon that ever lived. But as we stood at the precipice of Sinnoh's highest peak, a different truth began to crystallize. A truth that would rewrite the very foundation of Pokémon biology. You see, the long-held belief that Mew is the common ancestor was always based on genetic evidence, on strands of code that appeared universal. Yet that evidence only told part of the story. What the heights of Mount Coronet revealed was something far older, far more fundamental, and far more intimate. It happened in the most sacred space in the Pokémon world, the Hall of Origin, that shimmering chamber perched above the clouds, where the air itself hums with the resonance of creation. When that space-time rift in Hisui finally closed, when the protagonist stood before the being known as the Original One, the truth was spoken not in words, but in a vision that flooded the mind. Arceus did not merely create the world, it fractured itself. Every Pokémon that has ever existed, that exists now, or that will ever exist, is a shard of that original form. A fragment of a being so vast that its physical body had to dissolve into countless pieces to shape the universe. Think about what that means for a moment. The moment Arceus hatched from that egg in the swirling chaos, it possessed 1,000 arms. Not metaphorical arms, not symbolic extensions of will, but actual limbs of pure energy and matter. And when it shaped the cosmos, those arms didn't just push and pull the fabric of reality, they shattered. Each arm became a different Pokémon, and each Pokémon carried within itself a piece of the Creator's essence. This is not mythology, this is the foundational law of the Pokémon world, whispered through every evolution, every type, every move taught from parent to offspring. Suddenly, the biological connection between all species is no longer a matter of genetics or common descent. It is a matter of shared divinity. When a Magikarp struggles and evolves into a Gyarados, it is not simply growing stronger, it is awakening a deeper fragment of the original will. When a Pichu learns to generate electricity, it is tapping into the same primal energy that Arceus used to ignite the first stars. Every egg that hatches contains within its shell a spark of the original one, a spark that has been passed down through eons of division and recombination. This redefines everything we thought we knew about Pokémon ancestry. Mew, with its remarkable ability to learn any move and its DNA containing the blueprint of every species, is not the ancestor. Mew is simply a particularly pure fragment, a fragment that retained a greater memory of the whole. But Mew itself is a fragment, just like Pikachu, just like Groudon, just like the smallest Weedle. The difference is one of degree, not of kind. Arceus did not create Pokémon in the way a potter shapes clay. It created Pokémon by emptying itself, by scattering its own being across the dimensions of time and space. That is why the plates exist. Those 18 stone tablets, each imbued with a type, are not merely artifacts. They are the physical remnants of Arceus's original form, the pieces that did not become living creatures, but instead became the laws of nature. When Arceus wields a plate, it is essentially reclaiming a lost aspect of itself. And when a Pokémon learns a move of a specific type, it is channeling that same ancient law through its own fragment of divine origin. The shock of this revelation is not just theological, it is deeply personal. Every trainer, every Pokémon, every bond formed between human and creature is a reunion of fragments. The love you feel for your partner Pokémon is not merely emotional, it is a cosmic echo of the moment when Arceus looked upon its scattered pieces and felt a longing to be whole again. That longing is encoded into the universe itself. And as we stand on the peak of Mount Coronet, staring into the light of the Hall of Origin, we begin to understand that Arceus's sleep was not an end, it was a transfer of trust. The Creator released itself into its creation, trusting that its fragments would find their way back to each other, that the 1,000 arms would eventually learn to work together again. But that reunification is not a simple collapse back into one being. It is a journey through countless lifetimes, through every region, every battle, every evolution. The multiverse that Arceus set in motion is vast beyond comprehension, and the 1,000 arms still stretch across dimensions we have not yet explored. What happens when the fragments remember their origin? What happens when they begin to resonate with each other across the boundaries of space and time? That is a story waiting to unfold, a chapter that will take us far beyond the skies of Sinnoh and into the very structure of reality itself. The fragment theory leaves us with a profound question. If every single Pokémon is a piece of the original one, torn from its body in the act of creation, where is the whole? How does a being continue to exist when its essence has been scattered across every life form that has ever lived? The answer changes everything we understand about the Creator. It suggests that Arceus is not a creature that simply sits in a hall on a plateau. It implies that Arceus is the entire system, the air, the land, the water, and every consciousness that dwells within them. It is not shattered, it is spread. This brings us to one of the most complex theories in the entire Pokémon mythos, the theory of the multiverse. We know from the expansive history of the Pokémon world that there are branching realities. The world where the ultimate weapon fired in Kalos, the world where it did not, the world where Mega Evolution exists, the world where it is merely a forgotten possibility. These are not contradictions in a story. They are parallel dimensions living side by side. The theory suggests that Arceus does not simply exist in our specific timeline. It exists across every single one, simultaneously. The Arceus of the world you explored as a child is the same consciousness as the Arceus of the world a decade ago, and the world of the distant future, the same hands shaping every possibility at once. If you look back at the ancient Sinnoh myths, they describe a truly alien image. The original one shaped the world with 1,000 arms. For years we visualized this as a physical phenomenon, a giant beast with countless limbs reaching into a void of chaos. But the mystical texts rarely speak in pure literalism. 1,000 is a number of completion. 1,000 means everything. 1,000 means infinite. What if the arms are not limbs of flesh, but limbs of reality? What if each arm is a separate thread of existence? When the myth states that Arceus used its 1,000 arms to shape the world, it means it shaped every world, every possible outcome of creation, every possible history, every divergent choice, all woven together at once by the same singular mind. This gives us a true glimpse of the cosmic scale of Arceus compared to a standard Pokémon. Think about the consciousness of a single living creature. A Magikarp feels the cold pressure of the deep ocean. A Pikachu feels the spark of excitement and the warmth of its trainer. A human feels ambition, love and fear. These are singular streams of experience. They react to the moment. They live in a straight line of time. Now consider the consciousness that holds 1,000 realities in its awareness at the same time. It is not a stream. It is an ocean of oceans. The texts tell us Arceus fell into a deep sleep after the universe was finished. But the sleep is not a rest. It is a necessity. The only way a mind can process the weight of infinite timelines, the joy and suffering of 1,000 different worlds, is to pull back from the specifics, to let the body rest so the soul can manage the chaos of the multiverse. A standard Pokémon interacts with its environment. Arceus creates the environment for billions of lives across thousands of worlds. It is not merely thinking. It is the fabric of thought itself. When you stand before Arceus in the Hall of Origin, you are not meeting the full being. You are meeting a projection, a single facet of a crystal that has 1 trillion faces. You are speaking to an avatar, while the true consciousness is draped across the lattice of all existence. The myth of the 1,000 arms was never a literal description of its body. It was a confession from the ancient peoples. They knew they could not comprehend its reach. They called them arms because that was the closest word they had for the strings it uses to pull the levers of reality across infinite possibilities. This overwhelming reach, this existence across 1,000 worlds, leaves us with a very practical mystery. If Arceus is a consciousness spread across infinite realities, how does it anchor itself to just one? How does it speak to a single human in the Hisui region, or leave a sign for a champion in Sinnoh without collapsing the barrier between the timelines? The answer is found in the plates. They are not simply items that change a type. They are the anchors. They are the physical fragments of this infinite being that fell into our single timeline. They are the communication devices that allow the mortal world to interact with the infinite mind of the Creator. The next chapter explores this dynamic in depth. We are talking about the role of the plates in modern life, not as battle trinkets, as the final interface between a god that lives in every timeline and the single fragile world we call home. The 1,000 arms reach across 1,000 worlds, but how do they touch our own? The answer rests in the objects we call the plates. They are the tangible fingerprints of the Creator, the leftover scaffolding of reality itself. When Arceus shaped the universe from the vortex of chaos, its power did not simply fade into the void, it condensed. It crystallized into physical laws, and these laws did not just govern gravity or motion, they governed the very essence of what an element could be. The plates are the bridges between the infinite, timeless form of Arceus and the finite physical world we inhabit. Every time a Geodude raises its rocky fist or a Magikarp splashes in the stream, it is resonating with a fundamental plate. The Zap plate governs the concept of electricity itself. A Pokémon adapted to using electricity is not simply an animal with a biological quirk. It is a being deeply attuned to the fragment of Arceus that carried the Zap plate into existence. This means the elemental types on every Pokédex screen today are not arbitrary categories invented by researchers for convenience. They are the surviving signatures of the original creation. A water type exists because the splash plate was laid down at the beginning of time, dividing the liquid from the solid. A ghost type exists because the spooky plate carved out a space for souls and shadows within a physical universe, a pocket of the distortion world stitched into our own reality. Your world is literally made of a mosaic of 18 distinct fundamental forces. Your starter Pokémon is not just a companion for your journey. It is a living echo of a specific shard of the Creator's will, a tiny fragment of the original one that chose to walk the earth rather than remain in the Hall of Origin. This completely reframes the battle system every trainer takes for granted. When you command an attack, you are not merely giving an order. You are asking your Pokémon to channel the specific frequency of a plate. A fire-type move lands for super effective damage because the flame plate fundamentally overwrites the resonance of the icicle plate within the opponent's biology. It is not just strong against ice. It is an active cosmic law invalidating another, a directive from the creation itself. The entire type chart is a map of how these plate energies interact when they are forced into conflict. They were never meant to fight. They were meant to coexist in perfect harmony, as they did inside Arceus' original body, where all types were one unified whole. Every battle is a tiny echo of the primordial disharmony that caused Giratina's banishment. It is a small, controlled explosion of the tension between space and time, or matter and antimatter, argued through the language of the plates. A critical hit is a moment where a Pokémon aligns so perfectly with its plate that reality bends slightly in its favour. A type immunity is a lockout, a specific plate refusing to acknowledge the existence of another. Normal types are the default state, the untouched canvas, which is why Arceus itself is normal before it touches a plate. It is the source of all plates, so it stands in the centre of the chart. It is the only being that can wield all arms at once, changing its entire typing on a whim, because it is not borrowing the power of the plate. It is the plate. It is the source of the river. So what truly happens if all the plates are gathered together in one place? We saw a glimpse of this in the Hisui region. Gathering them does not just allow Arceus to change its form, it effectively reintegrates reality. The world becomes whole again. The barriers between our dimension and the distortion world grow thin because the full suite of rules is present in a single location. The cracks in space-time begin to seal. But destruction, that is the true horror. If a dread plate were physically shattered, the concept of dark would begin to fade from existence. Dark types would slowly lose their abilities. Their moves would flicker and fail. Eventually, the type itself would be forgotten, erased from the genetic memory of every Pokémon. The very fabric of your reality is entirely dependent on the existence of these objects. They are the pillars of the temple. If one falls, the entire structure risks collapse. The distortion world is a warning, a scarred remnant of what happens when the plates are not there to govern a plane. It is a world of pure entropy, a realm where gravity is a suggestion and direction is meaningless. The reason the hero of Hisui is asked to gather the plates is not just for personal power or for Arceus to manifest. It is to prevent the decay that threatens to spread from the space-time rift. The plates are the stitches holding the multiverse together, and if they are scattered too far or broken, the fabric unravels. They are Arceus' own body, left behind as a life support system for the universe. They cannot be destroyed easily, because they are the definition of existence itself, but they can be moved. They can be lost. This brings us to the most profound question about the deity of the Pokémon world. Why leave them scattered? Why leave the keys to the universe lying around in caves and temples, vulnerable to being gathered by criminals or forgotten by time? Arceus constructed a world that could run without constant supervision. It bound itself to the physical realm by giving away its own components. This was not a mistake of exhaustion. It was an act of absolute trust, a deliberate vulnerability for the sake of creation. It handed over its power so that life could have a system to grow within. It stepped back so that we could step forward. This act of leaving the plates scattered across time and space tells us everything we need to know about its heart. It did not hold itself above the universe. It wove itself into it. This willingness to be broken and shared, this absolute trust in the beings it created, this is the nature of its mercy. The benevolence of the Creator is not a distant myth. It is the very reason our world still stands, and that is the deepest truth we have yet to explore. The plates we discussed in the last chapter are more than just artifacts governing type energy. They are fragments of Arceus's own being, left scattered across the world like seeds. And seeds, of course, are meant to grow. But why would a creator, a being of absolute power, choose to break itself into pieces and let those pieces wander the earth? The answer lies in something far more subtle than cosmic architecture. It lies in a desire that seems almost human, perhaps even vulnerable. Arceus did not create the universe and then step away in cold indifference. The myths of Sinnoh and Hisui speak of a deep sleep after creation. But sleep is not abandonment. Sleep is rest, and rest implies a wish to see what has been built thrive on its own. The benevolence of the Creator is not a passive benevolence. It is a patient one, a quiet hope that the beings inhabiting this world, both human and Pokémon, would learn to live together without constant divine intervention. Consider the very first encounter between Arceus and a human in the lore we know best. In the events of Pokémon Legends, Arceus, the creator, does not appear as a tyrant demanding worship. Instead, it reaches across time and space to pluck a single human from their own era and drop them into the wild, untamed land of Hisui. Why? Not to punish, not to test for the sake of cruelty, but to offer a chance for that human to prove that coexistence is possible. And what did that human do? They built a survey corps. They studied Pokémon behavior, learned their types, calmed their frenzies, and filled a Pokédex. They did not enslave or destroy. They observed, respected, and connected. That is the kind of spirit Arceus looks for. The trials it sets are not arbitrary obstacles. They are mirrors. Every trainer who stands before a legendary Pokémon, every human who earns the trust of a wild creature, is being measured against a quiet standard. Can you see the Pokémon as more than a tool? Can you recognize that their will is as real as yours? Arceus does not ask for worship. It asks for understanding. And the proof of that understanding is written in the bonds formed between humans and Pokémon across generations. The trials take many forms. Sometimes they are literal, like the summoning of the late guardians or the appeasement of Dialga and Palkia. Sometimes they are subtle, like the simple act of raising a team with love instead of force. In the ancient texts of the Canalave library, there is a phrase: when the original one saw that its creation was complete, it smiled. That smile is the only reward. It is the acknowledgement that the world is in good hands. But why not simply stay and guide those hands directly? Why does a god of such power choose to remain mostly hands-off? There is a profound humility in that choice. If Arceus intervened every time a conflict arose, if it micromanaged the evolution of every species, then the world would be a puppet theatre, and humans and Pokémon would be mere dolls. True coexistence cannot be forced. It must be chosen. So Arceus steps back, leaving behind only the faintest echoes of its presence, the plates, the ancient myths, and the occasional ripple of time travel. It trusts that the fragments of itself, scattered in every Pokémon, will eventually remember where they came from, and that humans too will remember that they are part of the same original harmony. This is why the bonds today, a child and their Pikachu, a veteran and their Garchomp, are not accidents. They are the quiet fulfillment of a plan set in motion eons before the first human walked. Every time a Pokémon evolves through trust, every time a trainer heals a wounded creature instead of abandoning it, the creator's benevolence is justified. And still, Arceus watches from a place beyond our dimension, beyond even the space-time that Dialga and Palkia govern. That place is called the Hall of Origin, and it is not a throne room. It is a chamber floating in a void of pure potential, where the line between thought and reality blurs. To reach it would require a journey beyond the physical, beyond the known maps of Sinnoh or Hisui, and perhaps that is the final trial, not to conquer, but to be worthy of entering a realm where the Creator itself resides, not as a ruler, but as a silent witness to the world it let go. The doors of that hall have never been forced open. They only open for those who have shown without question that they understand the true purpose of coexistence. And so, after all of Arceus' trials and tests of spirit, after the fragments of its own being were scattered across every corner of creation, the Creator withdrew, not into silence, not into oblivion, but into a slumber so deep that even the fabric of reality itself seems to bend around it. We have spoken of Arceus' benevolence, of its desire for coexistence, but now we must ask, where does a god go when it chooses to rest? The answer lies in a place that defies every law of physics, every dimension we know, and every path we might try to walk. It is called the Hall of Origin, and it is not simply a room, nor a realm, nor a pocket of space. It is a sanctuary that exists beyond reality itself. The nature of this dimension is inseparable from Arceus' own essence. When the Original One shaped the universe, it did not merely carve out a planet or a galaxy. It wove together the threads of time, space, and matter, and then it slipped away into a stillness that predates all of them. The Hall of Origin is that stillness made manifest. It is a place where the concepts of before and after lose their meaning, where distance is not measured in miles or light years, but in the absence of any measurable coordinate. Imagine standing in the center of a bubble that contains only the memory of everything you have ever seen, but nothing else. That is the closest our minds can come to grasping the Hall of Origin. Arceus sleeps there, not as a being lying down in a bed, but as a presence folded into the very silence that existed before the first egg hatched. Why can no conventional space-time travel reach this place? Because conventional space-time travel relies on the rules that Arceus itself created. Dialga and Palkia govern the flow of time and the expanse of space, but their authority ends at the threshold of their creator's sanctuary. The Hall of Origin is not within the universe, it is outside it, a hidden chamber in the architecture of non-existence. Even if you could command Dialga to stop time, or Palkia to tear open a rift, those powers would be like a child using a stick to try to reach the moon. The Hall of Origin sits in a layer of reality that does not acknowledge the existence of time or space as we know them. It is a dimension of pure intent, where Arceus' will alone defines the shape of things. And because Arceus is asleep, that will is dormant, making the dimension even more inaccessible. It is a room with no door, no window, and no wall, because walls imply separation, and here there is nothing to separate, only the presence of the Creator. And yet, the games and the myths give us a visual symbol for this unreachable place, the stairway to the stars. In Pokémon Diamond, Pearl and Platinum, the player ascends a long, spiraling staircase of ice and light to reach the Hall of Origin. But that staircase is not a physical structure. It is a metaphor, a bridge drawn by the imagination of the universe. The stairs appear when Arceus chooses to extend an invitation, and only to those who have proven their worthiness. The steps themselves are not carved from stone or crystal. They are formed from the essence of the stars, of the primordial light that Arceus used to shape the cosmos. Each step you climb is a step closer to a being whose thoughts are older than time. The stairs spiral upward, but direction is meaningless here. Up might be sideways, forward might be backward. The staircase exists to give a human mind something to hold on to, a way to process the impossible. In truth, the stairway to the stars is a gesture of mercy. a translation of the divine into something a mortal can traverse. When you finally stand in the Hall of Origin, you are not standing in a room. You are standing in the center of Arceus' awareness, even as it sleeps. The walls of the hall are made of a pale, ethereal light that pulses with the rhythm of a heartbeat you cannot hear. The floor is a mirror of the cosmos, reflecting nebulae and galaxies that never existed, because they are not reflections of our universe. They are glimpses of other possibilities, other timelines that Arceus dreamed but never brought to life. The Hall of Origin is the archive of all that could have been, all that might still be, and all that was discarded. It is the creator's private gallery of unfinished worlds, and Arceus itself, the being you meet there, is not the full form of the original one. It is a projection, a fragment of consciousness left behind to interact with those who have climbed the stairs. The true essence of Arceus remains in a state of slumber so profound that even its own thoughts are submerged in the deep ocean of pre-existence. To disturb that slumber would be to risk waking something that the universe cannot sustain. The creation trio was formed to manage the world while Arceus rests, and the late guardians keep watch over the spirit of reality. But the Hall of Origin remains inviolate, a sacred space that no Pokémon, no human, no Dialga or Palkia can enter without an explicit summons. And even then, you are only allowed a single glimpse before the stairs dissolve and you are returned to the world. Why does Arceus sleep? Perhaps because creation is exhausting, even for a god. Perhaps because the only way to allow free will and independent life is to step back, to let the fragments of yourself live their own stories. Or perhaps the sleep is not sleep at all, but a form of meditation, a deep communion with the infinite silence that was there before the chaos. The Hall of Origin is not a prison. It is a retreat, a place where Arceus can exist without the weight of every prayer, every battle, every cry of every Pokémon. It is the ultimate act of letting go, and yet the myths are not finished. They whisper of a future where Arceus may stir again, where the stairway to the stars may manifest not for a single champion, but for all of creation. That story, the next chapter in the eternal myth of the original one, is one we will explore together soon. It is the tale of what comes after the slumber, of what happens when the dreamer finally opens its eyes. The future of the myth is already being written, and it may be stranger, more beautiful, and more terrifying than anything we have yet imagined. The Hall of Origin, that impossible chamber beyond the fabric of reality itself, remains sealed to any traveller who tries to reach it through ordinary space and time. No ship, no portal, no journey through the distortions of the distortion world can bring a soul to the place where Arceus slumbers. And yet, we now stand on the precipice of something far more unsettling than a physical journey, because the discovery of Arceus, the confirmation that a single being shaped the universe from a swirling chaos of nothing, has not only rewritten the history of the Pokémon world, it has shattered the very foundations of how science understands that world. For generations, the academic halls of the Pokémon Research Academy taught a clear, neat lineage. Mew, the ancestor of all Pokémon, whose genetic code contains the blueprint for every species. That was the accepted truth, the cornerstone of evolutionary biology in the Sinnoh region and beyond. But the fragment theory, revealed in the heights of Mount Coronet, turns that cornerstone to dust. Every Pokémon, from the humblest Magikarp to the mightiest Rayquaza, is not a descendant of Mew in the traditional sense. They are fragments of Arceus itself, pieces of the original one scattered across the world when it shaped creation. Mew's DNA, so famously unique, is not the source. It is a particularly pure echo, a fragment that preserved a memory of the original unity. This changes everything. The taxonomic charts, the family trees, the entire framework of Pokémon biology must be redrawn. The fossil Pokémon, once thought to be ancient ancestors, become something else entirely. Remnants of a primordial state that was itself a part of Arceus's body. The scientific community, thrown into a quiet revolution, now faces a question that would have been dismissed as myth a decade ago. If Arceus is the source, and if it fell into a deep sleep after creating the universe, what does it mean for the future? Is the original one still dreaming, or is its slumber a temporary pause? Researchers in the Celestic Town archives and the Canalave library have begun to study the patterns of the late Guardians and the Creation Trio for any sign of disturbance. They monitor the dimensional rifts near the Distortion world, the subtle shifts in space-time measured by the devices at the Spear Pillar. There is a growing theory that Arceus' sleep is not eternal, that it may wake again, and when it does, the very fabric of reality could be reshaped as it was at the beginning. The evidence is scattered, but compelling. The plates, those 18 elemental tablets that alter Arceus' type, are not merely artifacts of a forgotten age. They are keys, or perhaps anchors. The people of Hisui understood that collecting the plates could summon the original one. In the modern era, similar fragments have been found in remote ruins, in the depths of the Tumbleweed Desert, in the hidden chambers beneath the Snowpoint Temple. Each plate recovered strengthens the invisible thread, connecting this world to the realm of the Creator. Some scholars believe that if all 18 plates were to be gathered and aligned at the proper celestial moment, Arceus would awaken from its slumber. Whether that awakening would bring a new creation, a purification of the world, or simply a return of its full presence is unknown. But the potential is real, and it is being studied in quiet corners of the Pokémon League's classified research division. But the philosophical impact of this knowledge runs deeper than any scientific paper. Knowing that the world has a definitive creator, a single consciousness that willed time itself into existence, changes the nature of every question about purpose and meaning. No longer can we say that the Pokémon universe is a random accident of evolution or a product of cosmic chance. There is a design, there is a will, and that will is not distant or indifferent. Arceus, as we have seen in its interactions with humans and Pokémon throughout history, is benevolent. It cares. It sent a fragment of itself, or perhaps a fragment of a fragment, back through time to Hisui, to ensure that the bond between people and Pokémon would be forged correctly. That act alone proves that the Creator is invested in the outcome of this world, and that means every action we take, every choice we make, carries weight beyond our own lives. We are participants in a story that began before time, and the ending is not yet written. The ongoing research into the original one has therefore taken on a quiet urgency. Teams of archaeologists, physicists, and even a few psychically sensitive trainers have begun to collaborate across borders. They analyze the ancient texts of the Sinjo ruins, where Arceus' egg was said to have hatched. They map the energy signatures of the Creation Trio's dimensions, looking for fluctuations that might indicate a shift in Arceus' awareness. There is talk of a new expedition to the Hall of Origin, not through physical travel, but through a dimensional resonance technique that attempts to sync a human's consciousness with the place where time does not flow. So far, all attempts have failed. The hall remains unreachable, but the drive to understand, to perhaps communicate with the sleeping Creator, has become the defining quest of a generation of researchers. And yet, for all our instruments and theories, the most profound truth may be the simplest one. The future of the myth is not about predicting when Arceus will wake. It is about recognizing that every Pokémon you have ever met, every battle you have ever fought, every sunset you have watched over a lake is a piece of that original being. The universe is not a cold machine. It is a living body, and we are cells within it, each carrying a spark of the Creator's light. The research will continue. The scientists will keep their vigils. But the real shift is happening in the hearts of trainers who now look at their partners and see not just a friend, but a fragment of the divine. This understanding leads us to the next chapter of the story, where the nature of the architect itself becomes the focus. For if Arceus is the builder of all reality, what does it mean to be an architect of that scale? What are the tools, the blueprints, the silent forces that guide its hand? The answer lies not in the past, but in the ongoing act of creation, the eternal shaping of what is yet to come, and that is the story of the eternal architect. It is a strange thing to consider that the scientific community of the Pokémon world, after centuries of cataloguing species and mapping evolutionary trees, may have been looking at the evidence entirely backwards. The researchers who study the so-called Original One have had to tear down assumptions that were once considered absolute. For generations, the fossil record and genetic analysis pointed to Mew as the common ancestor, a small, pink mythical Pokémon whose DNA contains the code for every other species. But the deeper we dig into the lore of Arceus, the more that picture shifts. The discovery of the plates, the emergence of the Hisui region's historical texts, and the direct testimony of a trainer who travelled through time have forced a radical re-evaluation. It is not that Mew was wrong. It is that Mew was only a piece of a much larger truth. Arceus is not just another Pokémon with a high base stat total. Arceus is the source code. Every type, every creature, every dimension, they all trace back to that single egg that manifested in the void before anything else existed. And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, the unity of all life under one creator. The shocking truth we have been circling since the beginning of this series is not just that Arceus made Dialga and Palkia and Giratina. It is that Arceus made everything. Time, space, spirit, matter. These are not separate forces that were assembled like parts of a machine. They are emanations of a single being. When Arceus shaped the universe with its 1,000 arms, it did not build a world from external materials. It extended itself outward. The chaos was not transformed into something else. It was organized by the presence of the Original One. And when the job was done, when the planets were set in motion and the laws of physics were woven into existence, Arceus did not vanish. It slept. But even in that deep and inflexible slumber, its presence remained woven into the fabric of reality. Consider what that means for every Pokémon you have ever encountered. The Rattata on the outskirts of Viridian City, the Magikarp flopping in every freshwater lake, the legendary birds that command the seasons, they are all, in a very real sense, fragments of Arceus. The Lake Guardians, Uxie, Azelf, Mesprit, were created to govern knowledge, willpower, and emotion, the spiritual pillars that give life meaning. But they too are pieces of the whole. Dialga and Palkia govern time and space, the stage on which the drama of existence plays out. And Giratina, banished to the Distortion world for its destructive nature, still carries the antimatter that balances creation. There is no corner of the Pokémon universe that is not touched by Arceus. You cannot find a single species, a single type, a single legendary that does not owe its existence to that first hatching. The plates themselves are the most tangible evidence of this unity. 18 plates, each corresponding to a different type, and each one found scattered across the world. They are not mere artifacts. They are pieces of Arceus' own being, left behind as the creator shaped the universe. In Pokémon Legends, Arceus, we learned that collecting these plates allows a trainer to approach the Original One, to prove themselves worthy of a fragment of its power. But the deeper implication is that every type, every Fire Blast, every Thunderbolt, every Shadow Ball is a manifestation of Arceus' original form. The reason a Charmander can breathe fire and a Tentacruel can shoot poison is because those elements exist within the creator. There is no duality, no separation. The universe is a system of echoes, and Arceus is the voice that first sang them into being. And yet, for all this knowledge, the god of Pokémon remains an enduring mystery. We do not know why Arceus chose to create. The myths do not say. We do not know if it was loneliness, or curiosity, or a purpose too vast for human minds to grasp. We know that Arceus is benevolent. It sought to protect humans and Pokémon in the movie Arceus and the Jewel of Life, and it sent a trainer back in time in the Hisui region to help build a better future. But benevolence does not imply understanding. The same being that created the concept of love also created the concept of gravity, and the same hands that shape the oceans also shape the volcanoes that destroy. The mystery is not diminished by knowing the origin. In fact, it grows larger. So, where does that leave us? The final chapter of this documentary is not an ending, because the story of Arceus is not one that can be closed. The scientific research into the original one will continue. New games, new movies, new generations of trainers will encounter the legend in different forms. Perhaps one day, we will learn what happened to that deep sleep. Perhaps Arceus will wake, or perhaps the creator is already awake, watching from its hall of origin beyond time and space, and we simply lack the senses to perceive it. The only certainty is that every Pokémon you have ever loved carries a spark of the first existence. That Rattata, that Magikarp, that legendary bird. They are all part of the same infinite being, and in that unity there is a kind of peace, a reassurance that even in a world of chaos and battle and evolution, there is a single thread that ties everything together. The eternal architect may be silent, but its work is everywhere, and that perhaps is the most comforting thought of all. What did you think of this journey? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this changed your perspective or taught you something new, consider subscribing for more mind-expanding content. And if you know someone who would find this as fascinating as you did, share it with them. These are the kind of conversations that matter.